I forgot to tell my wife I had called a technician to fix the company's security camera. When I accidentally checked the footage, I was horrified to uncover a dark secret about my wife and my male personal assistant. 10 minutes later, the worst happened. So there I was, living what I thought was the American dream. You know, the one they sell you in those glossy brochures with the perfect house, the perfect spouse, and the illusion that everything's under control. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But on that particular Thursday, I was still blissfully unaware that my life was about to become a reality TV show I never auditioned for. I'm Graham Cole, 38 years old, and co-owner of Harper & Holt Consulting, a mid-sized firm that specialized in making other companies look like they had their crap together. The irony of that wouldn't hit me until later, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. My business partner, Richard Harper, handled most of the client-facing stuff because he had that natural charisma that made people trust him with their money. Me? I was the behind-the-scenes guy, the one who actually made sure the ship didn't sink while everyone else was busy taking Instagram photos on the deck. And then there was Lydia, my wife of 7 years, the woman I'd pledged my eternal devotion to in front of 200 witnesses and an open bar that cost more than my first car. Lydia ran our HR department, which she took very seriously, perhaps a little too seriously, if you ask me. She treated employee conflicts like they were geopolitical crises and somehow managed to turn every staff complaint into a 3-act drama complete with PowerPoint presentations and action items. I used to joke that she should have been a UN negotiator instead of an HR director, but she never found that funny. Lydia didn't find most of my jokes funny, actually, which should have been my first red flag, but hindsight's 2020, right? The office itself was your standard corporate setup. Gray cubicles, motivational posters that nobody actually found motivating, and that one printer on the 3rd floor that jammed every single time you were in a hurry. We had about 45 employees spread across 3 floors of a building in downtown Seattle, and somehow, we'd managed to convince ourselves we were making a difference in the world. The coffee was mediocre, the AC was always either too cold or not cold enough, and Sharon from accounting microwaved fish in the break room at least twice a week, despite the multiple passive-aggressive notes taped to the microwave. This was corporate America in all its beige-colored glory. For the past few weeks, we'd been dealing with a security camera situation that was driving me absolutely insane. The system had crashed during a power surge back in July, and since then, about half our cameras were basically just expensive decorations mounted on the walls. I'd brought it up in 3 separate management meetings, each time suggesting we get them fixed immediately. But Lydia, in her infinite wisdom and her obsession with quarterly budgets, kept pushing it back. "We'll handle it next quarter, Graham," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively like I was suggesting we install a gold-plated fountain in the lobby. "It's not a priority right now. We need to focus on the Henderson account." The Henderson account. I was so sick of hearing about the damn Henderson account. Sure, they were worth about $2 million annually, but I'm pretty sure our building could have been actively on fire and Lydia would have said, "We'll deal with it next quarter. We need to focus on Henderson." So I did what any rational, slightly frustrated husband would do. I went behind her back and fixed the problem myself. I found Victor through a buddy of mine who worked in building security downtown. Victor was this quiet, efficient guy in his 50s who showed up with a toolbox that looked like it could rebuild the International Space Station. He assessed our system in about 20 minutes, gave me a quote that was surprisingly reasonable, and had everything up and running within 2 days. The man was a magician. Every camera was now operational. The feeds were crystal clear. We're talking HD quality that could probably pick up on someone's existential crisis from 50 feet away. And he even upgraded our storage system, so we could keep footage for 90 days instead of 30. The funny thing, and by funny I mean the thing that would later make me want to bang my head against every wall in the building, is that I completely forgot to tell Lydia the cameras were fixed. It wasn't intentional, really. I'd been swamped with the Morrison proposal. We'd had that emergency client call about the data breach simulation, and somewhere between answering 87 emails and trying to remember if I'd paid the water bill at home, mentioning the cameras just slipped my mind. Plus, there was a petty part of me, a small, childish part that I'm not particularly proud of, that enjoyed having fixed the problem she kept deprioritizing. I figured I'd casually mention it at some point, maybe drop it into conversation like, "Oh yeah, by the way, Those cameras you said weren't a priority? Fixed them 3 weeks ago. No big deal. That Thursday started like any other. I dragged myself out of bed at 6:15 after hitting snooze twice, shuffled through my morning routine on autopilot, and listened to Lydia complain about how the new intern, some kid named Tyler or Trevor or something equally forgettable, kept formatting his reports wrong. I nodded in all the right places while internally wondering if it was too early to start drinking. We had coffee together in our kitchen that was featured in some home design blog once, which Lydia brought up at every dinner party like it was her greatest achievement. She was wearing this navy blue pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her perfume, some designer brand I couldn't pronounce, smelled like what I imagined luxury and tax evasion would smell like if they had a scent. Big day today, she said, scrolling through her phone while her coffee went cold. I've got back-to-back meetings until at least 7. Another late night? I asked, trying not to sound as annoyed as I felt. This was becoming a pattern lately. Late nights, weekend, emergencies, urgent calls that she had to take in the other room. But I chalked it up to her being dedicated to her job. Lydia was nothing if not dedicated. Just how it is during performance review season, she replied without looking up. You know how it gets. I did know. Or at least, I thought I did. Performance review season was always hectic. Lots of meetings with employees, documentation, uncomfortable conversations about productivity and goals. It made sense. Everything made sense. That's what I kept telling myself. We drove to work separately. She had some early morning thing with the department heads, and I had to stop by the post office to mail some contracts. When I got to the office around 8:30, she was already deep in conversation with Damien, my personal assistant. Damien was 26, fresh out of business school, and had that eager-to-please energy that made him both useful and occasionally exhausting. He'd been with us for about 8 months, and I'd honestly thought he was doing a decent job. Organized my schedule, handled client calls when I was tied up, remembered everyone's coffee orders, and never once microwaved fish in the break room, which automatically put him in my top 10 favorite employees. Morning, boss, he said with that bright smile of his. Your 9 o'clock, called to reschedule. I moved them to Tuesday at 2. Also, the Patterson files are on your desk, and I updated the Fletcher spreadsheet with the new projections. You're a lifesaver, Damien, I said, meaning it. See, everything was normal. Everything was fine. Lydia kissed me goodbye around 5:30, right there in the lobby where everyone could see, like we were starring in some commercial for successful marriages. Don't wait up, she said. This HR meeting is going to run long. Budget discussions with the senior staff. Want me to bring you dinner? I offered because that's what good husbands do. No, we ordered in. I'll probably be home around 10. She kissed me again, and I caught that perfume smell, luxury and tax evasion, and watched her walk back toward the elevators. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 7 years. We owned a business together. We had a mortgage and a joint checking account, and one of those fancy coffee makers that does 17 different types of espresso. You don't question someone you've built a life with, especially when they're wearing a pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio that screams credibility. I left around 6, stopped at the grocery store to grab ingredients for the stir-fry I'd been craving all week, and spent my Thursday evening exactly like I spent most Thursday evenings, cooking dinner for one, catching up on a documentary about financial fraud that felt oddly appropriate in retrospect, and falling asleep on the couch before Lydia got home. It was completely, utterly, perfectly normal. And that's exactly what made what happened next so spectacularly, devastatingly worse. Friday morning rolled around with all the enthusiasm of a DMV appointment, which is to say I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck made entirely of paperwork and regret. Lydia's side of the bed was already empty. She'd apparently gotten up early for some critical HR thing that couldn't wait, which was becoming her favorite excuse lately. I found a post-it note on the bathroom mirror that said, "Meeting ran late. Left early. See you at the office," with a little heart drawn at the bottom. That heart felt about as genuine as a $3 bill. But again, I was still operating under the delusion that my marriage was intact. I got to the office around 7:15, which was early even for me, but I'd slept like garbage and figured I might as well be productive with my insomnia. The building was practically empty. Just me, the security guard who nodded without actually seeing me, and probably Gerald from IT, who I'm pretty sure just lived in the server room at this point. I grabbed my usual coffee from the lobby cafe, A large dark roast that tasted like it had been brewed with the tears of overworked employees, and headed up to my office on the third floor. My office was nothing fancy. Decent view of the parking lot, a desk that I'd inherited from the previous owner, some diplomas on the wall that were supposed to make me look credible, and a bookshelf full of business books I'd bought with every intention of reading but never actually opened. There was a photo of Lydia and me from our wedding on my desk, both of us grinning like idiots who had no idea what the next 7 years would bring. I should have thrown that picture in the trash right then and there, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I settled into my chair, opened my laptop, and started going through the 73 emails that had accumulated since I'd left yesterday. Most of them were the usual corporate nonsense: meeting requests, status updates, someone asking if we could move the quarterly review to Thursday instead of Friday because of scheduling conflicts, which was code for "I don't want to work late on a Friday." I was about to respond to a particularly passive-aggressive email from accounting when I noticed the security camera software icon on my desktop. Now, here's where my morning took a sharp left turn into hell. I hadn't checked the camera feed since Victor installed the new system 3 weeks ago. There'd been no reason to, really. We weren't having security issues. Nobody was stealing staplers or spray painting profanity in the parking garage, and honestly, I'd just forgotten the thing existed. But something made me click on it that morning. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was my subconscious trying to save me from years of therapy bills. Or maybe the universe just decided that Friday was as good a day as any to completely demolish my worldview. The software opened up with a grid of camera feeds, each one showing a different part of the building: lobby, parking garage, second floor hallway, break room where Sharon was probably already microwaving something that smelled like a crime against humanity. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly like it should. And then I saw the timestamp. The system had helpfully bookmarked motion events from the previous evening, because of course it had. Victor's fancy new setup included motion detection software that flagged any activity after hours. There were maybe 15 or 20 clips from last night, mostly cleaning crew, a few people working late, nothing unusual. But one clip caught my eye, timestamped at 8:47 p.m., location tagged as Executive Office 3A. Executive Office 3A was my office. I felt this weird prickle at the back of my neck, that instinctive warning system that evolution gave us to detect predators and bad decisions. My office should have been empty at 8:47 p.m. I'd left at 6. I'd locked the door. I was pretty sure I'd locked the door. Who the hell was in my office at almost 9 o'clock at night? I clicked on the clip with the kind of casual curiosity that you have right before your entire life implodes, like opening an email from the IRS or checking your bank account after a weekend in Vegas. The video loaded, crystal clear HD courtesy of Victor's excellent work, and suddenly I was watching a film I never wanted to see, starring people I thought I knew. There was Lydia, my wife of 7 years, sitting in my office chair. The expensive ergonomic one I'd bought after throwing out my back last year. She was wearing the same navy pantsuit from yesterday, though her jacket was off and draped over the armrest like she'd gotten comfortable. And standing behind her, hands on her shoulders in a way that was definitely not included in his job description, was Damien, my assistant. The kid I'd hired 8 months ago because his resume was impressive and he'd seemed eager and competent. For about 3 seconds, my brain tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe he was giving her a professional shoulder massage because she'd complained about tension. Maybe this was some weird new team-building exercise that HR had implemented. Maybe I was having a stroke and hallucinating the whole thing. But then Lydia tilted her head back and laughed. That same laugh she used when she was genuinely amused. The one I hadn't heard directed at me in about 6 months. And Damien leaned down and whispered something in her ear that made her smile in a way that sent my coffee cup crashing to the floor. "You've got to be kidding me," I said out loud to my empty office, because apparently I'd become the kind of person who narrates their own psychological breakdown. I should have stopped watching right then. Any sane person would have closed the laptop, called a lawyer, and started planning their exit strategy. But I'm not a particularly sane person, especially not at 7:30 in the morning while watching my marriage disintegrate in high definition. So I kept watching like some kind of masochist who'd forgotten how to protect his own mental health. Damien's hands moved from her shoulders down her arms in a way that was unmistakably intimate. Lydia reached up and put her hand over his, her wedding ring, the one I'd spent 3 months' salary on. catching the overhead light like it was mocking me specifically. They weren't discussing quarterly reports or employee retention strategies. This wasn't a late-night work session about budget allocations or performance reviews. This was my wife and my assistant having what could only be described as a hands-on meeting in my office, in my chair, probably breathing my air and definitely destroying my faith in humanity. The video was 4 minutes and 37 seconds long. I know because I watched the timestamp tick by like I was watching a bomb countdown in an action movie. Except the bomb was my marriage and the explosion was going to be my emotional stability. At the 2-minute mark, Lydia stood up and Damien pulled her closer, and that's when I hit pause so hard I nearly broke my spacebar. My hands were shaking. My coffee was all over the floor, creating a puddle that looked like a modern art installation titled, "Man Discovers He's an Idiot." My heart was doing this weird thing where it felt like it was simultaneously racing and stopping, like it couldn't decide whether to keep me alive or just give up entirely. Okay, I said to myself, because apparently I was fully committed to the whole talking to myself thing now. Okay, this is fine. This is totally fine. This is just my wife having an affair with my assistant in my office after lying about a late HR meeting. This is extremely fine. The sarcasm was automatic, a defense mechanism my brain deployed when reality became too much to process straight. I rewound the video 10 seconds, purely to confirm I wasn't hallucinating, and immediately regretted it because nope, it was still happening, still real, still the worst thing I'd seen since that time I accidentally walked in on my college roommate doing things that should have required a permit. I sat there in my destroyed coffee puddle of an office, staring at the paused video on my screen, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't sadness yet. That would come later, probably around 3 a.m. for the next 6 months. It wasn't even anger, though that was warming up in the bullpen. It was this cold, clear realization that everything I'd believed about my life for the past 7 years was a carefully constructed lie, and I'd been the only one not in on the joke. The timestamp on the video said 8:47 p.m., Thursday, October 9th, 2025. The timestamp on my watch said 7:33 a.m., Friday, October 10th, 2025. In less than 12 hours, I'd gone from a happily married business owner to a man watching his wife's infidelity in 4K resolution like it was a Netflix documentary I couldn't pause. And the worst part? They had no idea I knew. Lydia was probably in her office right now, planning her day, drinking her overpriced latte, completely unaware that I'd just stumbled onto footage that would make a divorce lawyer weep with joy. I closed the laptop, stood up, and looked at my reflection in the darkened screen. Well, Graham, I said to myself, this is going to be one hell of a Friday. You know that moment in horror movies where the protagonist hears a weird noise in the basement and instead of doing the smart thing, like leaving the house, calling the cops, or literally anything that doesn't involve investigating, they grab a flashlight and walk directly toward their own demise? That's exactly what I did, except my basement was a computer screen and my flashlight was the replay button. I sat back down in my coffee-soaked chair, opened the laptop again, and told myself I was just being thorough. I needed to be absolutely sure of what I'd seen before I did anything drastic, right? That's what rational people do. They gather evidence. They confirm facts. They definitely don't torture themselves by rewatching their wife's betrayal frame by frame like some kind of sadistic film critic, but hey, apparently that's where I was at in my personal development journey. The video was still paused on that moment. Lydia standing, Damien's hands on her waist, both of them frozen in a tableau that belonged in a museum exhibit titled, "Reasons to Never Trust Anyone Ever Again." I took a deep breath that did absolutely nothing to calm me down and hit play. What happened next made the first viewing look like a Disney movie. Damien spun Lydia around to face him, and she had this expression I'd never seen before, or maybe I had, and just hadn't been paying attention. It was this mix of excitement and mischief, like they were teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs instead of two grown adults destroying a marriage in corporate real estate. She said something I couldn't hear because Victor's fancy camera system apparently didn't include audio, which was either a blessing or a curse depending on how much psychological damage I wanted to inflict on myself. Then Damien, my assistant, the guy I'd personally trained, the one I'd given a Christmas bonus to last year, leaned in and kissed my wife. Not a polite peck on the cheek. Not an accidental slip during a professional goodbye. This was a full contact, Olympic-level kiss that suggested they'd had plenty of practice and weren't particularly concerned about getting caught. My stomach lurched like I was on a roller coaster designed by someone who hated humanity. I reached for my coffee and remembered I'd already spilled it, which was probably for the best because I would have absolutely thrown up in it. Okay, that's enough, I muttered, reaching for the mouse to close the window. But my hand hovered there like it was controlled by some masochistic puppet master who thought I hadn't suffered enough. And like an idiot, a complete and total idiot who apparently enjoyed emotional self-harm, I didn't close it. Instead, I maximized the window to full screen because why not get the complete cinematic experience of my life falling apart? The detail was extraordinary, really. Victor had done too good a job. I could see everything. The way Lydia's fingers gripped the back of Damien's neck, the way he pushed her back against my desk, the one I'd eaten lunch at earlier that day. The way her wedding ring glinted in the fluorescent office lighting like it was actively participating in the betrayal. I could even see the motivational poster on the wall behind them, the one that said "Success is a team effort" in big inspirational letters. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were definitely teaming up, just not in the way corporate America intended. I should mention that my office had pretty standard furniture, desk, 2 chairs for clients, a small couch by the window that I used for reading contracts. That couch, I realized with growing horror, was about to become significantly less innocent. Lydia pulled Damien toward it, and that's when I actually said no out loud like I was watching a character in a horror movie make a terrible decision. Except the characters were real and the movie was my life. They sat down on the couch, and I'm not going to describe in detail what happened next because I value what's left of my sanity and also because this isn't that kind of story. Let's just say that the late HR meeting Lydia had mentioned wasn't about budget discussions or employee evaluations. Unless employee evaluation was some kind of euphemism I'd been too faithful to understand, in which case Damien was apparently getting a very thorough performance review. I watched for maybe 30 more seconds, 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, before I finally found the willpower to hit pause again. The timestamp read 8:49 p.m. The video had a total runtime of 4 minutes and 37 seconds, which meant I still had over 2 minutes of footage left. 2 minutes I absolutely did not need to see. Why did I hire Victor? I asked the empty office. Why did he have to be so damn good at his job? Couldn't he have installed cameras that were slightly blurry? Or maybe just pointed at the ceiling? Would that have been so hard? But no. Victor had given us crystal clear HD surveillance with night vision capabilities and motion detection, because the universe apparently thought I needed to see my marriage implode with absolute clarity. Thanks, Victor. Really appreciate the attention to detail, buddy. I minimized the window, then immediately maximized it again like some kind of psychological yo-yo. My brain couldn't decide whether it wanted to see more or pretend the whole thing never happened. The problem was, I couldn't unsee what I'd already seen. That image was burned into my retinas like I'd stared at the sun, except the sun was my wife cheating on me, and the warmth was actually the cold, creeping realization that I'd been living a lie. The rational part of my brain, the tiny part that wasn't currently screaming, started making calculations. If this video was from last night at 8:47 p.m., how long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Had every late meeting been code for hooking up with my assistant? How many times had she kissed me goodbye before going off to do this? How many times had Damien looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, sir," and right away, "Boss," while secretly sleeping with my wife? I felt like I was in one of those optical illusion pictures where once you see the hidden image, you can't unsee it, and suddenly every interaction I'd had with both of them for the past 8 months was taking on a whole new, nauseating meaning. That time Lydia suggested I take Damien to the Henderson client meeting because she thought he needed the experience? That time Damien volunteered to help Lydia reorganize the HR files on a Saturday? That time I came back from lunch early and found them both in the break room laughing about something they immediately stopped talking about when I walked in? "You absolute idiot, Graham," I said, and I meant it. All the signs had been there, lit up like a Vegas strip, and I'd been too trusting or too stupid or too busy with quarterly reports to notice. I scrolled back to the beginning of the video, back to that moment when it was just Lydia sitting in my chair looking relaxed and Damien standing behind her. They looked comfortable together, familiar. This wasn't their first time doing this. You don't get that comfortable with someone overnight. This had been going on for a while, and I'd been the oblivious husband working late while they were apparently working each other. The anger was starting to build now, replacing the shock with something hotter and more dangerous. I could feel it rising in my chest like heartburn, except heartburn doesn't make you want to burn down everything you've built over the past 7 years. My hands clenched into fists, and I had this sudden urge to punch something, preferably Damien's face or maybe just a wall, because walls don't require bail money. But underneath the anger was something worse, humiliation. Pure, unfiltered embarrassment at being the guy who didn't know. The sucker. The fool. I was the punchline to a joke everyone else had been in on, and the worst part was, they were probably still laughing. Lydia was probably in her office right now, planning her day, maybe even texting Damien about when they could meet up next, completely unaware that I'd stumbled onto their little production. I checked the motion detection log again. There were more clips from other nights, September 28th, October 2nd, October 5th. They'd been using my office like it was their personal hotel room, and I'd been none the wiser because the cameras were supposedly broken. Lydia had been the one pushing to delay the repairs. Lydia had been the one saying it wasn't a priority. Of course she had. She'd been protecting her affair, making sure there was no evidence. No way for me to accidentally discover what was happening after hours. And it would have worked too, if I hadn't gone behind her back and hired Victor. Thank you, Victor, I whispered to the empty office, and I actually meant it this time. Thank you for being good at your job. Thank you for installing cameras that work. Thank you for accidentally giving me the evidence I'll need to burn this whole thing down. I finally closed the laptop, unable to watch another second. My hands were still shaking, my coffee was still decorating the floor, and somewhere in this building were two people who had no idea their world was about to end. I looked at the clock. 7:52 a.m. In about 8 minutes, people would start arriving for work. Lydia would probably show up around 8:30 with her latte and her lies. Damien would bounce in with his eager smile and his complete lack of shame, and I would have to look at both of them and pretend I didn't know. At least, for now. I spent the next few minutes sitting in my office like a defendant waiting for a verdict, except I was the judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one extremely caffeinated package. My brain was running through about 17 different scenarios simultaneously. Everything from walking out and never coming back to hiring a skywriter to spell out, "My wife is cheating on me," over downtown Seattle. Neither option seemed particularly productive, but they were definitely more appealing than what I was about to do, which was absolutely nothing. Well, not nothing exactly. I was going to sit here and watch them walk in like everything was normal, like they hadn't spent last night treating my office furniture like props in their own personal soap opera. I was going to smile and nod and pretend I didn't know, because the thing about having nuclear-level evidence is that you don't just casually drop it at 8 in the morning. You wait. You plan. You make sure that when the bomb goes off, the blast radius is exactly what you intended. At least, that's what I told myself while I cleaned up the coffee spill with paper towels from my desk drawer, trying to look like a functioning human being instead of a man whose marriage had just been murdered in high definition. I pulled up my email and attempted to respond to some messages, but every sentence I typed came out wrong. Dear Mr. Patterson, thank you for your inquiry about our Q4 projections, which are looking great unlike my marriage, which is a dumpster fire. Delete. Hi, Janet. Yes, I can attend the budget meeting on Tuesday, assuming I haven't driven my car off a cliff by then. Delete. Good morning, team. Just a reminder that our quarterly review is coming up, and also trust no one because everyone is a lying snake person. Delete, delete, delete. This was going to be harder than I thought. At 8:07, I heard voices in the hallway. Early arrivals, probably the accounting team because they were always weirdly punctual. I straightened my tie, took a breath that did absolutely nothing to steady my nerves, and pulled up a spreadsheet on my computer so I'd look busy and normal and definitely not like someone who'd just discovered his entire life was a carefully orchestrated lie. At 8:23, I heard her laugh. Lydia's laugh carried down the hallway like a warning siren, except instead of alerting me to danger, it was just reminding me that danger was already here and had been sleeping in my bed for 7 years. I gripped the edge of my desk hard enough to leave marks, forced my face into something resembling neutral, and waited. She appeared in my doorway at 8:26, looking exactly like she always did, put together, professional, like a woman who definitely hadn't spent last night doing extremely unprofessional things with my employee. She was wearing a charcoal gray dress today, her hair pulled back in that sleek ponytail she favored for serious meeting days, and carrying her signature leather portfolio that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "Morning, honey," she said brightly, like we were starring in a commercial for successful marriages and not a true crime documentary. "You're here early. Couldn't sleep?" The audacity, the absolute audacity of this woman to stand in my doorway and call me honey, while the footage of her betrayal was literally saved on my computer maybe 15 feet away from where she was standing. "Oh, you know me," I said, and I was genuinely impressed by how normal my voice sounded. "Just wanted to get a head start on the Patterson proposal. Busy day ahead." "That's my Graham," she said, smiling. "Always so dedicated." Dedicated. Right. I was dedicated. I was so dedicated that I'd stayed late hundreds of nights working on proposals and budgets and client presentations while she was apparently dedicating herself to my assistant. The irony was so thick I could have served it at a dinner party. "How was your meeting last night?" I asked, because apparently I was a masochist who enjoyed inflicting psychological damage on myself. "You said it ran late?" "Oh God, it was exhausting," she said, and she actually had the nerve to look tired, like lying was such hard work. "We didn't wrap up until almost 10. Budget discussions with the senior staff. You know how Dale gets about allocation numbers. He wanted to debate every line item." Dale. She was blaming Dale, our CFO, who was probably at home last night watching Netflix with his wife like a normal person who didn't use budget meetings as cover stories for affairs. Poor Dale, getting dragged into this narrative without even knowing it. "Sounds rough," I managed. "It was. But hey, that's the job, right?" She checked her watch. "I've got a 9 o'clock with the new hires for orientation. Should be done by 10:30 if you need me for anything." "I'll manage," I said, and that might have been the most honest thing I'd said all morning. She blew me a kiss, an actual kiss, with her hand and everything, and disappeared down the hallway, probably toward her office where she'd spend the next hour doing whatever HR directors do when they're not systematically destroying their marriages. I sat there for exactly 45 seconds, staring at the spot where she'd been standing, wondering if I'd imagined the entire conversation. Maybe I was having some kind of psychotic break. Maybe the video wasn't real. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at my desk, and this was all just an incredibly specific nightmare brought on by too much coffee and not enough therapy. Then Damien walked in, and all those maybes evaporated like my faith in humanity. "Morning, boss," he said with that puppy dog enthusiasm that I'd previously found endearing and now found absolutely enraging. He was wearing khakis and a blue button-down, his hair styled in that deliberately messy way that probably took him 20 minutes to achieve, looking like every generic assistant in every generic office in America. Except generic assistants don't typically sleep with their boss's wife, so Damien was special in the worst possible way. "Morning, Damien," I said, and it took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to follow it up with "you home-wrecking little snake." "Your 9 o'clock rescheduled to next week," he said, checking his tablet like everything was normal. "I moved the Henderson call to 2 p.m., and the Fletcher files are ready for your review. Oh, and Lydia asked me to remind you about the budget meeting on Tuesday. She wants to make sure you've reviewed the Q4 projections before then." Lydia asked him. Of course she did. They were probably coordinating schedules, making sure they had plenty of opportunities to sneak around behind my back. I wondered if they texted each other in some kind of code. Budget meeting probably meant, let's use Graham's office again. Q4 projections probably translated to where that cologne I like. My eye twitched. I felt it twitch, this involuntary spasm that I couldn't control, and I'm pretty sure if I'd had electrodes attached to my head, I could have powered the entire building with the rage currently surging through my nervous system. "Boss, you okay?" Damien asked, and he actually looked concerned, like he cared about my well-being. Like he hadn't spent last night doing things with my wife that definitely violated his employment contract and possibly several commandments. "I'm fine," I said through teeth that were clenched so tight I was surprised they didn't shatter. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." "Yeah, you look tense," he said, and I swear to God, if I'd been a cartoon character, steam would have been coming out of my ears. "You should take a break. Maybe go for a walk or something. Clear your head." "Clear my head." Excellent advice from the guy who'd been clearing my wife's schedule for extracurricular activities. I'll keep that in mind, I said. He stood there for another moment, probably waiting for additional instructions, or maybe just enjoying the view of a man slowly losing his mind, before adding, "Oh, and Lydia wanted me to grab her some coffee. The good stuff from that place on Fifth. You want anything?" They were getting coffee together. They were coordinating coffee runs. This was a whole operation, a well-oiled machine of deception and betrayal with caffeine breaks built in. "I'm good," I said, gesturing to the empty mug on my desk that still smelled like the coffee I'd spilled all over my floor during my earlier mental breakdown. "Already had some." Cool. I'll be back in like 20 minutes. He started to leave, then turned back with that smile that I now recognized as the smile of someone who was definitely sleeping with my wife. "By the way, boss, I just wanted to say thanks again for giving me this opportunity. Working here has been amazing. You and Lydia have built something really special." Something special. We'd built something special, and he'd been taking it for a test drive without permission. "Glad you're enjoying it, Damien," I said, and the sarcasm in my voice was apparently too subtle for him to detect, because he just grinned and walked out. I watched him disappear down the hallway, probably off to buy my wife her favorite overpriced latte, and I realized something important. I couldn't do this. I couldn't sit here and play normal for another hour, let alone another day. The performance was going to crack, probably in the next 30 minutes, and when it did, I was either going to say something I'd regret or throw my computer through the window. I pulled my phone out and stared at it, trying to decide what to do next. Call a lawyer? Call my business partner Richard and tell him his co-owner's marriage was imploding? Call a therapist and schedule an emergency session to discuss why I kept rewatching footage of my own betrayal? Instead, I opened my email and typed a message to the entire management team with a subject line that read, "Emergency team meeting, 10 a.m., mandatory attendance." If they wanted to play games, fine. But I was about to change the rules, flip the board, and light the whole thing on fire. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. You know what's funny about corporate America? We use meetings to solve everything. Bad quarter? Meeting. Employee conflicts? Meeting. Company restructuring? Meeting. Wife cheating on you with your assistant in your own office? Well, that definitely calls for a meeting. I sent that email at 8:47. Ironic timing considering that was the exact minute Lydia and Damien had started their performance last night. And spent the next hour and 13 minutes preparing for what would either be the most satisfying moment of my professional life or a spectacular act of career suicide. Honestly, I was fine with either outcome at this point. The conference room on the third floor was our biggest one, the kind with a long mahogany table that was supposed to make us look successful and a projector screen that we used for PowerPoint presentations that nobody ever actually paid attention to. I'd booked it for the entire morning, locked the door behind me, and started setting up my laptop like I was preparing a TED Talk on the subject of how to destroy your cheating wife's life in 20 minutes or less. Getting the video file ready was easier than I expected. Victor's security system had this convenient export feature that let you save clips directly to your hard drive. I'd already downloaded last night's highlight reel, all 4 minutes and 37 seconds of it, and loaded it into the presentation software. The thumbnail image was paused on a particularly damning moment. Lydia sitting in my office chair with Damien's hands on her shoulders, both of them smiling like they'd just won the lottery instead of destroying a marriage. I titled the presentation Company Ethics and Workplace Conduct Review because I'm petty and also because the irony was too perfect to resist. At 9:52, people started arriving. First was Richard, my business partner, looking confused because I hadn't given him any heads up about this meeting. Richard was a good guy, late 40s, sensible, the kind of person who actually read the employee handbook and remembered birthdays. He'd been instrumental in building Harper and Holt into what it was today, and I felt genuinely bad that he was about to witness what I was about to do. "Graham, what's this about?" he asked, settling into a chair near the head of the table. "Your email just said mandatory attendance. Is everything okay?" "Define okay," I said, which probably should have been his first warning sign that this wasn't a normal meeting. Next came Dale from accounting, then Jennifer from marketing, then the rest of the management team, about 12 people total, all looking varying degrees of confused and concerned. Sarah from operations actually brought her coffee and a notepad, ready to take minutes like this was a legitimate business meeting and not a public execution. At 9:58, Lydia walked in, still looking polished and professional in her charcoal dress, completely unaware that she was about to become the star of a screening she definitely hadn't auditioned for. She caught my eye and smiled, then took a seat in the middle of the table like she belonged there, like she hadn't spent last night doing things that would violate at least 7 company policies. "Morning, everyone," she said brightly. "Graham, I have that HR orientation at 10:30, so if we could keep this under 30 minutes, that would be great." "Oh, don't worry," I said, and my smile probably looked slightly unhinged because Richard gave me a weird look. "This won't take long at all." At 10:01, Damien rushed in looking apologetic, carrying Lydia's coffee from that expensive place on 5th. He handed it to her with a quick, "Sorry I'm late," that made my eye twitch again, then took a seat right next to her because apparently they weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. I waited until 10:03 to make sure everyone had arrived, then stood up and moved to the front of the room where the projector screen hung on the wall like a blank canvas waiting to become a crime scene. "Thanks for coming on short notice," I started, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "I know you're all busy, so I'll get right to the point. We're here to discuss company ethics and workplace conduct." A few people exchanged glances. Jennifer from marketing looked suspicious. She was sharp, probably already sensing that something was off. Dale looked bored, which was his default expression for any meeting that didn't involve spreadsheets. Lydia looked calm, maybe even slightly annoyed that I was taking up her valuable time with something as mundane as ethics. "As you all know," I continued, "we've had some security camera issues over the past few weeks. Cameras were down, footage wasn't being recorded, and honestly, it created a bit of a security concern." Lydia shifted in her seat. Just slightly, but I noticed. She was probably wondering where this was going, maybe starting to feel that little tingle of worry that people get when they realize they might have made a catastrophic mistake. "Well, I'm happy to report that the cameras are now fully operational," I said, and I saw Lydia's face go just a shade paler. "In fact, they've been operational for about 3 weeks now. Crystal clear HD footage, night vision, motion detection, the works. Our technician, Victor, did an amazing job." The room was quiet. People were nodding politely, probably wondering why I'd called an emergency meeting to discuss security cameras. Richard was looking at me like he was trying to figure out if I'd had a mental breakdown. He wasn't wrong. "Now, the interesting thing about having functioning security cameras," I continued, moving toward my laptop, "is that you get to see what really happens in the office after hours. Who's working late, who's dedicated to their job, who's using company property for, let's call them non-work-related activities." Lydia's hand, the one holding her expensive latte, started trembling. Just a little. Just enough that coffee sloshed dangerously close to the rim of the cup. Damien, meanwhile, had gone completely still, like a rabbit that just spotted a wolf and was hoping immobility would somehow save it. "So I thought," I said, reaching for the laptop, "that we should all watch some of this footage together. You know, as a team. Really get a sense of what's happening in our workplace when we think nobody's watching." "Graham," Lydia said, and her voice had this edge to it that I'd heard before, usually right before she told me I was being unreasonable about something. "I'm not sure this is." "Oh, I'm very sure," I interrupted, and I clicked the mouse. The projector hummed to life, and suddenly there it was, displayed on a 6-foot screen for everyone to see. My office, last night. 8:47 p.m., starring Lydia Cole and Damien Foster in a production I was now calling Reasons I'm Filing for Divorce. The silence in that room was spectacular. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a bomb goes off, or right after someone's world completely shatters. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. We all just watched as on-screen Lydia laughed at something on-screen Damien said, as he put his hands on her shoulders, as she reached up and touched his hand with hers. "Jesus Christ," Richard whispered, and I'd never heard him curse in the 7 years I'd known him. I let it play for maybe 15 seconds, just enough to establish what was happening, just enough to remove any possibility of misinterpretation, but not so long that we crossed into territory that would require an HR investigation. Then I paused it, right on that moment where Lydia was standing and Damien was pulling her closer. "So," I said, turning to face the room, "let's talk about company ethics." Lydia had gone from pale to completely white, like someone had drained all the blood from her face and replaced it with pure panic. She tried to stand, but her legs apparently weren't cooperating. You can't. This is a violation of privacy. I finished for her. Actually, no. These cameras are legally installed on company property, in company spaces, and according to our employee handbook, which you wrote, Lydia, so you should know this. All areas of the building except bathrooms and changing rooms are subject to surveillance. Page 47, Section 12, Subsection C. I checked this morning. Damien looked like he was about to throw up, which was honestly the most relatable thing he'd done all day. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish trying to figure out how to breathe on land. Is this? Jennifer from marketing started, then stopped, probably realizing there was no polite way to finish that question. Is this my wife having an affair with my personal assistant in my office? I supplied helpfully. Yes it is. Glad we're all on the same page. Dale from accounting, God bless him, actually pulled out his phone and started taking notes like this was a normal meeting and he was documenting action items. Should I be recording this in the minutes? He asked seriously. Absolutely, I said. Mark it down as major breach of company ethics policies and reasons the HR director will be updating her resume. Lydia finally found her voice, and it came out sharp and defensive, exactly like I knew it would. You had no right to show this. You're making a scene. This is unprofessional and unprofessional. I laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged even to my own ears. Lady, you turned my assistant into an unpaid actor in our marriage's sequel, and you're calling me unprofessional? I'm not the one who used late HR meeting as code for hookup session in my husband's office. Sarah from operations, bless her heart, actually clapped. Just once, quickly, before catching herself and looking embarrassed. But I saw it, and honestly, it made me feel slightly better about the whole situation. Graham, Richard said carefully, standing up like he was approaching a wild animal. Maybe we should discuss this privately, not in front of the entire management team. Why? I asked genuinely. They were going to find out eventually. Might as well rip the Band-Aid off now. Plus, Lydia's always talking about transparency and leadership. Consider this my contribution to transparent management practices. Lydia stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Her face had gone from white to red, anger finally overtaking the panic. You're being childish. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing all of us. Oh, I'm embarrassing? I gestured to the paused screen. I'm not the one who got caught on camera treating company furniture like a prop in my personal life drama. That's all you, sweetheart. Damien finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Save it. I cut him off. Your apology means about as much as your employee loyalty, which is apparently worth less than whatever my wife was offering you for participating in this little arrangement. The room had devolved into chaos now. People were whispering to each other. Some were staring at Lydia and Damien like they'd grown extra heads, and Richard was standing there looking like he'd just watched his entire company implode in real time. Which, to be fair, he kind of had. The beautiful thing about publicly detonating someone's life is watching them scramble to pick up the pieces while everyone else just stares. It's like witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Except the car is your marriage and the crash is happening in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and stale bagels that nobody's touching because they're too busy watching the show. Lydia was standing now, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her face cycling through emotions faster than a slot machine. Shock, anger, humiliation, more anger, then landing on what I can only describe as desperate damage control mode. This is a misunderstanding, she said, and I had to give her credit for trying. Her voice was shaking, but she was going for authoritative, like if she just said it confidently enough, everyone would forget what they'd just witnessed on a 6-foot screen in high definition. That footage, it's taken out of context. Damien and I were discussing. Discussing what exactly? I interrupted, because I wasn't about to let her spin this into some kind of innocent misunderstanding. Ergonomic office chair positions? The best techniques for team building? How to completely destroy someone's trust while maintaining excellent posture. Jennifer from marketing let out a snort that she tried to cover with a cough. She failed. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot, and I saw at least 3 other people fighting smiles. This was terrible. This was a corporate nightmare. This was also, apparently, the most entertaining thing that had happened at Harper and Holt Consulting since Gerald from IT accidentally replied all to a company email with a cat meme. Graham, Lydia said, and her voice had gone from authoritative to pleading, which was a tone I'd heard before, but never in front of 12 witnesses. Can we please discuss this privately? This doesn't need to be public. I finished. You're right. It didn't need to be public. But then again, your affair didn't need to happen in my office, on company time, using company furniture. So I guess we're both making questionable choices today. Damien had his head in his hands now, and I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He was 26 years old, fresh out of business school, probably thought he was being so clever sneaking around with the boss's wife. Never occurred to him that security cameras might actually work, or that his boss might not be as oblivious as he looked. Youth is wasted on the stupid, as they say. Lydia started again, then stopped, her brain apparently short-circuiting as it tried to find a way out of this that didn't exist. You weren't supposed to see that. The room went even quieter, which I didn't think was possible. That's the thing about the truth. Sometimes it just slips out when you're panicking, and suddenly everyone knows exactly what you meant to keep hidden. Well, no kidding, I said, and I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice if I tried. I wasn't supposed to see that. I also wasn't supposed to find out my wife was cheating on me, and I definitely wasn't supposed to discover that my personal assistant was moonlighting as my marriage counselor's worst nightmare. But here we are, living in a world where security cameras work and Victor does excellent installations. Richard cleared his throat, which is what Richard did when he was uncomfortable and trying to be diplomatic. Graham, I think maybe we should adjourn this meeting and what? I turned to him, and I could feel 7 years of partnership in my voice. Pretend this didn't happen? Go back to our offices and act like everything's normal? Richard, my wife just got caught on camera having an affair with my assistant in my office. There is no, and that makes this better. The meeting happened. The footage exists. We're all standing here in this room together, and we all saw the same thing. I was comforting him, Lydia said suddenly, desperately, like she'd just found a life raft in the middle of the ocean. Damien was going through a difficult time. He was stressed about his performance review, and I was helping him. Oh my God, I said, and I actually laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had officially run out of patience for bullshit. You're really going with that? You were comforting him? With aromatherapy and full contact hugs? Is that what we're calling it now? Sarah from operations had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Dale was still taking notes on his phone, because apparently nothing, not even watching his co-worker's marriage implode, was going to stop him from documenting this meeting. Jennifer looked like she was watching her favorite reality TV show, completely invested in every moment. It was a mistake, Damien said quietly, still not looking up from his hands. It was stupid. It shouldn't have happened. You're right, I agreed. It shouldn't have happened. A lot of things shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have trusted you to organize my schedule while you were apparently also organizing private meetings with my wife. I shouldn't have given you a Christmas bonus last year. I shouldn't have recommended you for that training program in Portland. But mostly, you shouldn't have slept with my wife in my office like you were starring in the world's worst porno. Graham, Lydia snapped, and there was the anger I'd been waiting for. The real Lydia, the one who showed up when things didn't go her way. You're being immature. You're being vindictive. This whole display is beneath you. Immature, I repeated, and I felt something shift inside me, from anger to something colder and clearer. You know what's immature, Lydia? Having an affair with your husband's assistant. You know what's vindictive? Lying about late meetings while you're using his office as your personal love nest. And you know what's beneath me? Apparently, being married to someone who thinks HR meeting is code for horizontal refreshments. Richard made a strangled sound. I think it might have been a suppressed laugh, but he covered it well. I want to leave, Lydia said, moving toward the door. I'm not staying here to be humiliated. Too late, I said cheerfully. The humiliation already happened. You're standing in a room full of your colleagues after they just watched footage of you cheating on your husband. You can leave, but the humiliation's coming with you. It's like a party favor, except instead of a little bag of mints, you get to carry around the knowledge that everyone here knows exactly what kind of person you are. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, and turned back to look at me. For a second, just a second, I saw something in her face that might have been genuine remorse. Or maybe it was just more panic. I honestly couldn't tell anymore, and I wasn't sure I cared. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "Probably," I agreed. "But right now?" "Right now I regret marrying you more." She left. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the framed motivational posters on the wall, and suddenly there were only 11 people in the room instead of 12. Damien looked like he wanted to follow her, but couldn't quite figure out how to make his legs work. "Damien," I said, and my voice was surprisingly calm considering I'd just publicly destroyed two people's reputations in under 20 minutes. "You should probably start updating your resume." "Am I fired?" he asked, finally looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you think?" I replied, "You violated about 7 different company policies, destroyed any possibility of a professional working relationship, and oh yeah, slept with your boss's wife. So yes, Damien, consider yourself very, very fired." He stood up slowly, like an old man instead of a 26-year-old who'd just learned that actions have consequences. "I really am sorry," he said again. "I know," I said, and I meant it. "But sorry doesn't unfuck my wife, does it? Sorry doesn't undo the past 8 months of lies. Sorry is just a word people say when they get caught doing something they knew was wrong the whole time." He left too, less dramatically than Lydia, but with the same defeated slouch. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and then it was just me and the rest of the management team, all of us standing in this conference room that suddenly felt too small and too large at the same time. "Well," Jennifer said after a long moment of silence, "that was the most interesting team meeting we've ever had. Should I mark this as a recurring event?" Dale asked seriously, his phone still out. "Like, do we need to schedule follow-ups?" I laughed. I actually laughed, because what else was there to do? My marriage was over, my assistant was fired, and I'd just committed what could generously be called career arson in front of my entire management team. "No follow-ups needed, Dale," I said. "I think we covered everything." Richard walked over and put his hand on my shoulder, which was the most physical affection he'd shown in 7 years of partnership. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," I said honestly. "But I will be. Eventually. After therapy. And probably a lot of bourbon." "You want me to handle the paperwork?" he offered. "For Damien's termination, I mean. And whatever needs to happen with Lydia." "That would be great," I said, suddenly feeling exhausted like I'd run a marathon, except the marathon was emotional devastation and the finish line was alcoholism. "I need to call my lawyer. And maybe my therapist. Possibly both at the same time." Sarah stood up and started gathering her things, then paused. "For what it's worth, Graham, I think you handled that with remarkable restraint." I would have thrown the laptop at them. "The day's not over yet," I replied, and several people laughed, which felt surreal but also somehow exactly right. As everyone filed out, offering various versions of, "I'm sorry this happened," and "let us know if you need anything." I stood there in the empty conference room with my laptop still connected to the projector, the paused image of my wife's betrayal still displayed on the screen like modern art titled, "The Exact Moment Everything Fell Apart." I closed the laptop, disconnected the cables, and looked around the room one more time. "Well, Victor," I said to no one, "your cameras work great. Maybe a little too great. But thanks anyway." Then I walked out, leaving the conference room and whatever remained of my old life behind me. By the time I made it back to my office, my phone had already exploded with 17 text messages, 6 missed calls, and what I can only assume were the digital equivalent of people grabbing popcorn and settling in for the drama. News traveled fast in a mid-sized consulting firm, apparently faster than the speed of light and definitely faster than my ability to process what I'd just done. I ignored all of it. The messages, the calls, the probably well-meaning but ultimately useless attempts at comfort from coworkers who 30 minutes ago didn't know my life was a dumpster fire. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Nora Stein, attorney at law, and the only person I knew who could turn betrayal into legally binding paperwork. Nora and I went way back. College, actually, where she'd been the terrifyingly competent president of the mock trial team, and I'd been the business major who occasionally showed up to meetings. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly through LinkedIn and the occasional happy hour where she'd tell war stories about contentious divorces and custody battles that made my problems seem quaint. Well, they weren't quaint anymore. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Graham Cole, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. This is either a social call, which you never make during work hours, or you need a lawyer, which means something interesting happened. I'm betting on option 2. Nora, I said, sinking into my office chair. The same chair Lydia had been sitting in last night while Damien worked his magic or whatever the hell they were doing. I made a mental note to burn this chair later. How fast can we turn betrayal into paperwork? There was a pause. Then I heard the distinctive sound of a door closing. When Nora spoke again, her voice had shifted from friendly to business mode, which was exactly what I needed. Faster than your wife can delete her emails. What happened? I gave her the abbreviated version. Security cameras, surprise footage, office affair, public confrontation in a conference room with witnesses. I left out some of the more colorful language I'd used and definitely didn't mention the part where Sarah from operations had clapped, but I gave her the essentials. Nora listened without interrupting, which was one of her many talents, and when I finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Do you still have the footage? She asked. Saved on my laptop, backed up to the cloud, and probably burned into my retinas for the rest of my natural life, I confirmed. Perfect. Email it to me using my secure portal. I'll send you the link. How long have you been married? 7 years. No kids, thank God. Assets. Joint ownership of the company, the house in Queen Anne, 2 cars, retirement accounts, savings. We have a prenup, but it's pretty basic. Mostly just protects the company in case of dissolution. I heard typing on her end. Nora was already working, already building the case before I'd even officially hired her. This is why I loved her in a purely professional, please destroy my cheating wife's life kind of way. Okay, here's what we're going to do, she said, and I could practically hear her brain organizing everything into neat little legal boxes. I'm going to draft divorce papers today. I can have them ready by tonight. We'll cite adultery, which thanks to your video evidence will be stupidly easy to prove. Washington is a no-fault state, but having documented proof of infidelity helps with everything else. Asset division, spousal support if she tries to claim it, and general leverage. She's going to fight this, I said, stating the obvious. Lydia doesn't lose gracefully. Neither do I, Nora replied, and I believed her. Now the company. You said you're co-owners? With my business partner Richard Harper. It's split 3 ways. Richard has 40%, Lydia and I each have 30%. That's going to be complicated. She can't force a sale, but she can make things messy. However, if we can prove she violated company ethics policies, which it sounds like she definitely did, we might be able to leverage that into a buyout situation. Does your company have a morality clause in the ownership agreement? I pulled up the partnership documents on my computer, scanning through pages of legal jargon that I'd signed 7 years ago without really reading because I trusted everyone involved. Hindsight was 20/20, and apparently I'd been operating with cataracts. Section 8, subsection 4. I read aloud. Any partner found to be in violation of company ethics policies or engaged in conduct detrimental to the company's reputation may be subject to forced buyout at fair market value, as determined by an independent assessor. Beautiful, Nora said, and she sounded genuinely delighted. That's beautiful. We can use that. The affair happened on company property, during company time, and you have video evidence. Plus, you just showed that evidence to your entire management team, which means there are witnesses to her ethics violation. She's going to have a hell of a time arguing her way out of this. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not quite relief, but close enough. For the first time since watching that video this morning, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely drowning. What about Damien? I asked. I fired him in front of everyone. Can he sue for wrongful termination? Nora laughed, which was not the reaction I expected. Let him try. You have video evidence of him engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a superior on company property. That's grounds for termination in any employee handbook I've ever seen. Plus, if he's stupid enough to sue, we'll countersue for about 17 different things and make his life so miserable he'll wish he'd just accepted the firing and moved on. You're enjoying this, I observed. I'm enjoying the legal aspects of it, she corrected. The fact that you're going through hell right now? That part sucks, and I'm sorry. But professionally speaking, this is a lawyer's dream case. Clear evidence, multiple witnesses, documented violations, and a prenup that already establishes asset protection. Graham, I could win this case in my sleep. So what happens now? Now, you send me everything. The video, copies of your ownership documents, employment contracts for both Lydia and Damien, any financial records you have access to. I'll draft the divorce papers and have a process server deliver them tonight. Where does she stay when she's not at your place? We have the house together. I don't know where she'll go after what happened today. Not your problem, Nora said firmly. In fact, I'd recommend you go home right now, pack up her essentials, and have them ready by the door. She can collect them and find somewhere else to stay. You're not obligated to house someone who betrayed you. That seems harsh, I said, though I wasn't sure why I was defending Lydia at this point. Force of habit, probably. Graham, she cheated on you in your office. Harsh is relative. Now, I'm also going to recommend we freeze joint accounts. Not empty them. Just freeze them so neither of you can drain the funds during the divorce proceedings. It's standard procedure. Do it, I said, surprising myself with how quickly I agreed. 3 hours ago, I was a married man with a stable life and a successful business. Now I was apparently the kind of person who froze bank accounts and kicked his wife out of the house. Personal growth was weird. Good. I'll file the necessary paperwork with the court today. We'll also request a temporary restraining order preventing her from accessing certain company files and systems until we can sort out the ownership situation. Can we do that? We can do a lot of things when there's video evidence of ethical violations. Trust me on this. Oh, and Graham, stop talking to her. No texts, no calls, no in-person conversations. Everything goes through me now. If she tries to contact you, ignore it or document it and send it to me. The less direct communication you have, the better. I thought about all the years we'd been together, all the conversations we'd had, all the plans we'd made. And now we were reducing it to no contact and legal documentation. It felt surreal, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. Nora, how long does this usually take? The divorce, I mean. With your evidence and a good strategy? We could have preliminary hearings within a month, settlement negotiations within 2 or 3 months. If she's smart, she'll settle quickly and avoid dragging this out. If she's stupid and vindictive, she'll fight it, and we'll destroy her in court while billing her for the privilege. And the company? That's trickier. The buyout could take 6 months to a year, depending on how complicated the valuation gets. But we'll work on getting her removed from day-to-day operations immediately. She's a liability now, and Richard will understand that. I heard clicking on her end. Probably her assistant, or maybe just Nora herself, already pulling up documents and preparing for battle. The woman was a machine, a caffeine-powered legal weapon that I was incredibly grateful to have on my side. Okay, I said, feeling more exhausted than I'd ever felt in my life. Let's do this. One more thing, Nora said, and her voice softened slightly. How are you doing? Like, actually doing. It was the first time anyone had asked that question since this morning, and I wasn't prepared for how much it would hit me. I looked around my office, the same office where Lydia had betrayed me, where I'd spent countless hours building a business and a life that had apparently been built on lies. I'm furious, I admitted. I'm humiliated. I feel like an idiot for not seeing this coming. And I'm terrified that this is going to destroy everything I've built. It won't, Nora said with certainty. You'll get through this. It's going to suck for a while. It's going to suck a lot, actually. But you'll get through it. And when you do, you'll have a company that's yours, a life that's yours, and the satisfaction of knowing that you handled this with more grace than most people would have. I publicly humiliated my wife in front of the entire management team, I pointed out. After she privately humiliated you in your own office, Nora countered. Context matters. Now send me those files, go home, pack up her stuff, and try to eat something that isn't coffee or rage. I'll call you tonight with an update. Thanks, Nora. Seriously, that's what I'm here for. Oh, and Graham, welcome to the next chapter of your life. It starts with paperwork and ends with freedom. Let's get to work. She hung up, and I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. Then I opened my laptop, logged into the secure portal she'd just sent me, and started uploading files. The video, the ownership documents, employment contracts, financial records, everything that would help Nora build the case that would dismantle my marriage and hopefully save my company. By midnight, the divorce papers were drafted. By morning, Lydia's access to company systems was revoked. By noon the next day, Damien's ID badge was deactivated and his desk was empty. Nora had called it legal lightning, and she wasn't wrong. In less than 24 hours, we'd gone from evidence to action, from betrayal to battle stations. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to survive this. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face, which was appropriate considering my life had become a demolition site. I'd spent the previous night at a hotel because going home to the house I shared with Lydia felt about as appealing as diving into a shark tank wearing a meat suit. The hotel was one of those corporate chains that all look the same: beige walls, generic art, a bed that somehow managed to be both too soft and too hard at the same time. I'd ordered room service, drank 2 bottles of overpriced wine from the minibar, and fell asleep watching a documentary about financial fraud that hit way too close to home. When I walked into the office at 7:30, the energy was different. People were already there, way more people than should have been there that early. And they all suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting the moment I stepped off the elevator. Word had spread, obviously. In a company of 45 employees, a public affair revelation travels faster than a viral cat video. And by now, everyone from the interns to the janitorial staff probably knew that the HR director had been playing horizontal tag with the boss's assistant. I made it to my office without making eye contact with anyone, which was a feat of social avoidance that deserved an award. My coffee from the hotel was already cold, my head was pounding from the wine, and I had 17 new emails waiting for me, most of them with subject lines that made me want to fake my own death and move to a country without extradition treaties. At 8:15, Lydia arrived. I heard her before I saw her, the distinctive click of her expensive heels on the tile floor, moving fast like she was on a mission. She went straight to her office on the 2nd floor, and I watched through my window as she tried her keycard on the door. Once, twice, 3 times, each swipe getting more aggressive, like she could force the technology to cooperate through sheer willpower. The light blinked red every single time. I'd had IT revoke her access last night at Nora's recommendation. Her keycard was now about as useful as a library card at a car dealership, decorative, but ultimately pointless. From my vantage point 3 floors up, I could see her face cycle through confusion, then disbelief, then pure rage as she realized what had happened. She pulled out her phone, probably calling IT, probably about to unleash hell on some poor technician who was just following orders. I almost felt bad for whoever answered that call. Almost. 10 minutes later, she was in the lobby, and I could hear her screaming from 3 floors up. The acoustics in our building were terrible, which meant every word echoed through the stairwell, like she was using a megaphone specifically designed to broadcast humiliation. "There's been a mistake," she shouted at someone, probably Rebecca from reception, who definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with this. "My keycard isn't working. I need access to my office immediately." I grabbed my now cold coffee and walked to the elevator, because if I was going to watch this train wreck, I might as well have a front row seat. By the time I got to the lobby, there was a small crowd gathering. Employees pretending to check the bulletin board or grab coffee from the cafe, but really just watching the show because humans are fundamentally terrible and we all love drama when it's not happening to us. Lydia saw me the moment I stepped off the elevator, and her eyes locked onto mine like a heat-seeking missile that had just found its target. "Graham," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is going on? Why isn't my keycard working? Why can't I access my email?" I took a sip of my cold coffee, realized it tasted like regret and bad decisions, and gave her the most casual shrug I could manage. "System updates," I said simply. "You know how IT is. Always tinkering with things." Her face went from red to purple, which was a color I didn't know human skin could achieve without medical intervention. "Don't play games with me. You did this. You locked me out." "Me?" I put my hand to my chest in mock surprise. "Lydia, I'm just a humble co-owner trying to run a business. These kinds of technical decisions are way above my pay grade." "This is illegal," she hissed, moving closer, but apparently remembering we had an audience because she stopped about 5 feet away. "You can't just lock me out of my own office. I have rights. I'm a partner in this company." "Had rights," I corrected pleasantly. Past tense. "See, there's this interesting clause in our partnership agreement, Section 8, subsection 4, if you want to look it up. Says something about partners who violate company ethics policies being subject to," what was the phrase? "Oh right, immediate suspension of access pending investigation." There's no investigation, she practically shrieked. Sure there is, I said. We're investigating whether using company property for personal affairs, emphasis on affairs, constitutes an ethics violation. Spoiler alert, it does. Page 47 of the employee handbook that you wrote. The irony is really not lost on me, by the way. Gerald from IT had appeared from somewhere, looking uncomfortable in that way IT people do when forced to interact with human emotion. Ms. Cole, he said quietly, I've been instructed to revoke your system access until further notice. It's temporary, pending. Pending what? Lydia snapped at him, and Gerald actually took a step back. Pending my husband's temper tantrum? This is ridiculous. This is policy, I interrupted, and my voice was colder than I'd intended. You violated company ethics. You used my office for activities that definitely weren't in your job description. And now there are consequences. Novel concept, I know, but that's how the real world works. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her brain working, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this, anything that would give her back control. But there was nothing. The evidence existed. The witnesses existed. Her affair was documented in 4K resolution, and no amount of spin could change that. You're going to regret this, she said finally, her voice dropping to something cold and threatening. When my lawyer gets through with you. Your lawyer can talk to my lawyer, I said, pulling out my phone and holding it up. Nora Stein. I'll text you her number. You two should get acquainted since you'll be spending a lot of time together over the next few months. I walked past her toward the elevator, done with this conversation and done with her. As I pressed the button, I heard her say one more thing, quieter now, almost desperate. I didn't mean for this to happen. I turned back and looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd made choices and was now facing the fallout. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. That part was quickly overruled by the rest of me that remembered watching her betray our marriage in my own office. Yeah, I said. You just meant not to get caught. The elevator doors closed, and I rode back up to my office alone. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a journalist who'd somehow gotten my personal number, which was either impressive investigative work or a massive breach of privacy. Probably both. Mr. Cole, she said, I'm calling about the footage that's trending on social media. Do you have any comment? I nearly dropped my phone. I'm sorry, what footage? The security camera video. It's all over Twitter. Someone leaked it. My stomach dropped faster than my faith in humanity. I pulled up Twitter on my laptop, and there it was, my marriage's destruction, now with over 2 million views and climbing. Someone had edited it down to the highlights, added dramatic music, and titled it, HR Gone Wild, when office romance goes too far. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. A mix of sympathy, mockery, and people making popcorn gifs. Someone had even created a hashtag cameras don't lie. Any comment? The journalist asked again. I stared at the screen, watching the view count tick upward. Yes, I said finally. I always said our office was built on transparency. Guess I was more right than I knew. Months later, I sat in my new office. Same building, same floor, completely different locks and a chair I'd picked out myself because the old one had way too much emotional baggage and questionable stains that I didn't want to think about. The divorce had finalized 3 weeks ago after Lydia tried every legal maneuver in the book and discovered that video evidence beats creative lawyers every single time. Nora had been ruthless, efficient, and worth every penny of her frankly astronomical hourly rate. I got the house. I got 70% of the liquid assets. Most importantly, I got Lydia's 30% stake in the company for a buyout price that made Richard whistle low and say, Damn, Graham. Remind me never to piss off your lawyer. The morality clause had worked exactly like Nora said it would, and now Harper and Holt Consulting was mine and Richard's, split 60-40, with no HR director who moonlighted as a homewrecker. Sometimes, late at night when the office was empty and I couldn't sleep, I still pulled up that footage. Not because I enjoyed the pain. I'd had enough therapy to know that was unhealthy, but because it reminded me of something important. Every betrayal teaches you something if you're willing to learn. Mine taught me that trust needs to be earned, that security cameras are worth their weight in gold, and that late meetings should always come with verifiable meeting notes. Lydia had gone into hiding after the footage went viral, deleting all her social media and apparently moving to Portland or Phoenix or somewhere that started with P and wasn't Seattle. I heard through the office gossip chain, because some things never change, that she'd taken a job at a small firm doing HR consulting, which seemed like a spectacularly bad career choice for someone whose face was permanently associated with workplace ethics violations. Damien had sent me a Christmas card last month. Just a generic one from Hallmark that said, "Wishing you peace and happiness," with a handwritten note inside. No hard feelings. I've learned from my mistakes. I'd replied by mailing him a USB drive in a padded envelope with a label that read, "Never forget," and nothing else. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. More than it should have been. These days I started every morning the same way. Coffee, confidence, and a quick check of the security camera feeds, because once you've been burned, you learn to appreciate good surveillance. The cameras were always rolling now, capturing everything in perfect HD clarity. Because in life and in business, the moment you stop watching is the moment someone decides to audition for the wrong role. After my millionaire grandfather died and left me everything, my cheating ex-wife, who left me for her new lover, tried to sue me for the money. When I walked into the courtroom, my ex-wife rolled her eyes, but the judge froze. "Wait, the charges are against you," he said. "They never knew who I really was. Look, I've seen some ridiculous things in my 34 years on this planet. I've watched a guy try to microwave a burrito still wrapped in aluminum foil. I've witnessed someone parallel park for 20 minutes only to give up and take an Uber, and I once saw my college roommate attempt to iron a shirt while wearing it. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the moment I walked into courtroom 3B of the Philadelphia County Courthouse and locked eyes with my ex-wife, Miranda. The eye roll she gave me wasn't just some casual, ugh, Monday morning kind of deal. No, this was a full-body experience. Her eyes didn't just roll. They did a complete gymnastics routine, stuck the landing, and probably pulled a muscle on the way back down. I'm talking Olympic-level disdain here, folks. The kind of eye roll that comes with its own dramatic soundtrack and slow-motion replay. For a split second, I genuinely thought she might injure herself, like she'd somehow sprain a cornea or detach a retina from the sheer force of her contempt. Honestly, I almost started a slow clap right there in the middle of the courtroom. It was that impressive. She was sitting at the plaintiff's table, all dolled up in some power suit that probably cost more than my first car, her perfectly highlighted hair cascading over her shoulders like she was posing for a LinkedIn headshot. Next to her sat Trent. Yes, that Trent, the gym instructor with the IQ of a protein shake, looking like he'd borrowed his suit from his older brother's bar mitzvah circa 2007. The guy had so much hair gel in that you could probably see his reflection from space, and he was doing that thing where he flexed his jaw muscles to look intimidating. Spoiler alert, it wasn't working. But here's where it gets good. Judge Harold Reynolds, a man who'd been presiding over family court cases since before I was born, looked up from the case file on his bench. He adjusted his glasses, squinted at the papers, then looked directly at me standing there in my only decent suit, the one I'd bought specifically for Grandpa Henry's funeral 3 months ago. The judge blinked once, then twice, like his brain was trying to reboot after encountering a critical error. His mouth opened slightly, closed, then opened again, and I swear I could actually hear the Windows shutdown sound playing in his head. "Wait a minute," Judge Reynolds said slowly, his voice carrying that particular tone of confusion mixed with growing amusement. "The charges here, these allegations, they're against you?" He glanced down at the file again, flipped a page like maybe he'd missed something crucial, then looked back up at me with the expression of a man who'd just realized the punchline to a joke he'd heard 3 days ago. "Marcus Whitmore, you're the defendant they're claiming manipulated and exploited an elderly man." I couldn't help it. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "That would be me, Your Honor. The thing is, Miranda thought she had this whole situation figured out. She'd done the math in her pretty little head, probably while getting a pedicure or doing hot yoga or whatever it is people do when they have too much time and too little self-awareness. In her version of reality, she was suing her broke ex-husband, the guy who used to fix air conditioning units and unclog toilets for a living, the maintenance engineer, as I generously called myself, for what she believed was her rightful share of my late grandfather's estate. She'd probably pictured me still living in that crappy studio apartment in South Philly, still driving my 2003 Honda Civic with the duct-taped passenger mirror, still microwaving ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. What she didn't know what her smug lawyer Richard Pike apparently failed to properly investigate, and what was about to make this the most entertaining morning I'd had in years, was that the maintenance engineer she'd divorced 3 years ago, the guy she'd left with nothing but a sticky note and a half-empty apartment, was now the sole heir to a $30 million estate. Yeah, you read that right. $30 million. With an M. The kind of money that has accountants, investment portfolios, and causes distant relatives you've never met to suddenly remember your birthday. My grandfather, Henry Whitmore, had been a Philadelphia legend. Retired Superior Court judge, real estate mogul, the guy who owned half the commercial properties in Center City and had more connections than Verizon. He was the kind of man who wore 3-piece suits to breakfast, read 3 newspapers before lunch, and could make grown lawyers cry during cross-examination. And he was the only person in my entire life who'd ever told me something that actually stuck. Son, keep receipts on everyone who betrays you. Not for revenge, for clarity. Smart man. Scary smart. The kind of smart that makes you nervous until you realize he's on your side. So there I stood, in this wood-paneled courtroom that smelled like old law books and broken dreams, watching my ex-wife's carefully constructed fantasy start to crumble before her eyes. I could see her lawyer frantically whispering something to her, probably trying to figure out why the judge was looking at the case file like it was written in invisible ink. Miranda's perfectly painted face had gone from smugly confident to slightly concerned, her Instagram-ready smile starting to crack around the edges. And Trent? Poor, dumb Trent was just sitting there looking confused, which to be fair was pretty much his default setting. The guy probably thought estate meant a type of car. I leaned slightly toward my own attorney, Lucas Shaw, a sharp guy who charged by the hour and was worth every penny, and caught Miranda's eye across the courtroom. She was staring at me now, and I could literally see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out why I looked so calm, why I wasn't sweating, why I seemed almost amused. That's when I couldn't resist. I gave her my best smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes, and then I shifted my gaze to Trent. He was adjusting his too-tight collar, his tan looking especially orange under the fluorescent courtroom lights. I leaned just a little bit closer to Lucas, but kept my voice just loud enough to carry across the aisle. Nice suit, Trent, I said conversationally. Really brings out your ambition. Quick question though, did she pay for that? Or did you manage to buy it with my alimony money? The effect was instantaneous and beautiful. Trent's face went from spray tan orange to something resembling a sunburned tomato. His jaw clenched, and he half stood from his chair before Miranda grabbed his arm and yanked him back down, hissing something that I'm pretty sure wasn't courtroom appropriate. Her lawyer shot me a death glare that could have melted steel. But Judge Reynolds? Oh man, Judge Reynolds tried to hide it. He really did. He coughed into his hand, turning slightly away from the courtroom, his shoulders shaking just a little bit. When he turned back, he was wearing that expression judges wear when they're trying very hard to maintain professional decorum while internally dying of laughter. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said, his voice carefully controlled. Perhaps we should begin these proceedings with a bit more decorum. Of course, Your Honor, I replied, keeping my face perfectly innocent. My apologies. I'm just excited to be here. Lucas elbowed me gently in the ribs, but I could see him fighting back a smile too. Miranda's lawyer cleared his throat, loudly and importantly, like he was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. Your Honor, if we could proceed with the preliminary. Oh, we'll proceed, Judge Reynolds interrupted, leafing through the case file again. But I have to say, Mr. Pike, this is one of the more interesting cases I've seen cross my bench in quite some time. And I've been doing this for 27 years. That's when I knew. That's when I absolutely, definitely knew that today was going to be a beautiful day in court. The kind of day you tell stories about later, the kind that makes you believe in karma and cosmic justice, and all those things people post inspirational quotes about on Facebook. Miranda was still staring at me, her eye makeup starting to look a little less perfect, a tiny furrow appearing between her perfectly microbladed eyebrows. I could practically hear her internal monologue. Why isn't he scared? Why isn't he panicking? What does he know that I don't? Everything, sweetheart. I know everything. And as the bailiff called the court to order and Judge Reynolds prepared to officially begin proceedings, I settled into my chair, crossed my legs comfortably, and prepared to watch the show. Because that's what this was going to be, a show. And unlike the past 3 years of my life, for once I wasn't the one being played. I was about to get my favorite kind of justice, the legal kind, served with a side of poetic irony and garnished with just a hint of "I told you so." It was going to be a very good day indeed. Okay, so before we get back to watching Miranda's world implode in that courtroom, we need to rewind the tape a bit. Because you can't fully appreciate the sweet irony of this situation without understanding how I ended up sitting on a $30 million fortune in the first place. Trust me, this backstory is worth it. It's got everything: family drama, unexpected plot twists, and a funeral that looked like someone had accidentally sent invitations to the entire Eastern Seaboard power structure. 3 months before that beautiful courtroom showdown, my grandfather, Henry Whitmore, passed away in his sleep at the ripe old age of 87. And when I say he was sharp until the end, I mean the man could have out-negotiated a used car salesman while simultaneously solving a crossword puzzle and critiquing your life choices. 2 days before he died, he called me to discuss municipal bond yields and to tell me that my haircut made me look like I was auditioning for a boy band. That was Grandpa Henry, brutally honest, scary intelligent, and somehow both your biggest critic and your fiercest defender at the same time. The funeral was absolutely insane. I'm talking about a who's who of Philadelphia society, and honestly, half of Pennsylvania's political infrastructure. There were 3 state senators, 2 congressmen, at least a dozen Superior Court judges, all of whom looked genuinely sad, which tells you something about how respected he was. A collection of CEOs who probably had a combined net worth that could buy a small country, and enough lawyers to staff every firm from here to Pittsburgh. The parking lot at the church looked like a luxury car dealership having a convention. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, and one absolutely ridiculous Bentley that belonged to some real estate developer who Grandpa had apparently destroyed in court back in the 90s, but who showed up anyway to pay respects because that's just the kind of legend Henry Whitmore was. Me? I stood there in my funeral suit, the same one I was wearing in that courtroom, by the way, because I'm practical like that, shaking hands with people who kept saying things like, "Your grandfather was an extraordinary man, and he spoke so highly of you, and you must be so proud to carry on his legacy." And I was proud, genuinely, completely proud, because unlike most of the people in that church, I actually knew him. Not the legend, not the retired judge, not the real estate mogul. I knew Henry, the guy who taught me to play chess when I was 7, who let me stay up late watching old westerns, who told me that integrity was the only currency that actually mattered in life. You know who wasn't there? Miranda. Obviously. She was probably somewhere tropical at that exact moment, posting Instagram stories about living her truth and doing yoga on a beach with Trent, who was undoubtedly wearing one of those tank tops that's cut so low you can practically see his belly button. She'd never met Grandpa Henry. Not once in our entire 5-year marriage. And that wasn't an accident. That was a choice. Her choice, specifically. See, Miranda had always been too busy for family stuff. My family stuff, anyway. Her own family gatherings? Those were non-negotiable. But when I'd invite her to Sunday dinners at Grandpa's house, suddenly she had a headache, or a work thing, or a friend's crisis that required immediate attention. After about the 10th excuse, Grandpa had looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Son, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. You're currently on showing number 10. I'd laughed it off back then, made excuses for her, said she was just stressed with work. Grandpa had just shrugged and gone back to his newspaper, but I caught the look in his eye. He knew. He always knew. After the funeral service, after the burial, after the endless reception where I ate approximately 17 of those tiny sandwiches that taste like nothing but somehow cost a fortune, I sat down in the office of Bernard Castellano, Grandpa's attorney for the past 40 years. Bernie was old-school Philadelphia legal establishment, 3-piece suit, pocket watch, the whole 9 yards. The kind of guy who still used a fountain pen and probably had strong opinions about proper shoe-shining technique. I figured this would be quick. Maybe Grandpa had left me his chess set, the one we'd played on every Sunday for 20 years. Maybe his collection of vintage watches, or his law books, or perhaps that ridiculous painting of a ship that hung in his study that he'd always joked would be mine someday. Sentimental stuff. Meaningful, but not life-changing. Bernie slid a folder across his mahogany desk, the kind that's so polished you can see your reflection in it, and said with absolutely no preamble whatsoever, "Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore. You now own everything." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Everything," Bernie repeated, tapping the folder. "The house, the properties, the investment portfolio, the savings accounts, the stocks, the bonds, the whole estate. Your grandfather left it all to you. Total liquid and fixed assets come to approximately $30 million, give or take, depending on the market. There are some smaller bequests to charities and his housekeeper, but the bulk of the estate, we're talking about 97% of it, goes to you." For a solid 10 seconds, I just stared at him. My brain had completely blue-screened. $30 million. $30 million. That's the kind of money where you stop checking price tags at the grocery store. That's accidentally leave a $100 bill in your jeans and forget about it money. That's your great-great-grandkids will still be arguing about it money. That's, I don't lie. I finally managed to stammer out, which was super articulate of me. Bernie smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment and was thoroughly enjoying it. He opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter. I recognized Grandpa's distinctive scrawl immediately, all sharp angles and confident strokes. "He wanted you to read this," Bernie said, handing it over. My hands were actually shaking as I unfolded the letter. Grandpa's handwriting, still steady even at 87, filled the page. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Don't be sad. 87 years is a damn good run, and I got to see you become the man I always knew you could be. Here's the thing, son, you earned this inheritance. Not by being born into the family, not by sucking up to me, not by showing up at the end with flowers and fake tears. You earned it by having backbone. You showed up every Sunday for 20 years, even when you had better things to do. You called me every Wednesday evening, even when I know you were exhausted from work. You sat with me in the hospital during that pneumonia scare 3 years ago, and you never once asked about my will or my money. You came because you cared, and that's rarer than you think. Everyone else in this family sees me as a bank account with a pulse. You saw me as Henry. That's worth more than all the money I made in my entire life. So here's your inheritance. Everything I built, everything I saved, everything I invested. Use it wisely. Use it well. And remember who showed up when everyone else left. That matters. That's the real currency. Love, Grandpa." I had to set the letter down because my vision had gone blurry and I absolutely was not crying in front of Bernie Castellano. I was just having an allergic reaction to the leather chairs or something. Totally normal. Bernie, bless him, pretended to be very interested in organizing papers while I pulled myself together. When I finally looked up, he was holding out a glass of whiskey. The good stuff, probably older than I was. "Your grandfather left me specific instructions to give you this the moment after you read the letter," Bernie said. "He said you'd need it." I took the glass and downed it in one go. It burned in the best possible way. "So what now?" I asked, my voice only slightly hoarse. Bernie leaned back in his chair. "Now? Now you're a very wealthy man, Marcus. You'll need to make some decisions about the properties, the investments, the foundation he'd been running. But that can wait. For now, just let it sink in. Let it sink in. Right. I was a millionaire. Multiple times over. Me, Marcus Whitmore, the guy who'd been eating cereal for dinner twice a week just 6 months ago because it was cheap and easy. The maintenance engineer who'd spent 5 years being told by his wife that he'd never amount to anything special. The grandson who just showed up because that's what you do for people you love. I drove home that night in my beat-up Honda Civic, which suddenly felt extremely ironic, and sat in my crappy studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like Abraham Lincoln, and I laughed. I laughed until my sides hurt, until tears were streaming down my face, until my neighbor banged on the wall and yelled at me to keep it down. Because if only Grandpa Henry knew how absolutely, devastatingly perfect his timing was. If only he could see what was coming in 3 months. If only he knew that his letter, that beautiful, perfect letter about showing up and having backbone, would be the most prophetic thing he'd ever written. The universe has a sense of humor after all, and apparently it was on my side for once. So there I was, 30 days into being secretly rich, and let me tell you, it's a weird experience. I hadn't told anyone yet, not my coworkers, not my neighbors, definitely not the barista at the coffee shop who still gave me the struggling millennial discount without me asking. I was still living in my studio apartment with Abraham Lincoln on the ceiling, still driving my Honda with the janky side mirror, still buying the store brand everything at the grocery store because old habits die hard, and also because I genuinely couldn't process that I could now afford name brand cereal without checking my bank account first. Bernie had advised me to take it slow, figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Now that money wasn't a constant source of anxiety. So I kept going to work, kept fixing HVAC units and unclogging toilets, kept living my regular life, while sitting on a fortune that would make most people's heads explode. It was kind of fun, actually, like being a superhero with a secret identity, except instead of fighting crime, I was just really good at replacing water heaters. I was in the middle of eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container, living that glamorous millionaire lifestyle, obviously, when my phone rang. Lucas Shaw's name popped up on the screen, and I answered with my mouth full of lo mein because I'm classy like that. "Marcus," Lucas said, and his tone made me stop chewing immediately. He sounded somewhere between amused and concerned, which is a very specific lawyer tone that usually means someone's done something spectacularly stupid. "I need you to sit down." "I'm already sitting," I said, swallowing quickly. "What's wrong? Is it the estate? Did something happen with the properties?" "No, nothing like that. The estate is fine. It's just—" He paused, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. "I got served this morning with a lawsuit. Against you." I almost dropped my phone into my lo mein. "What? Who's suing me? For what?" "Your ex-wife." Time stopped. "I mean, not literally, but you know that feeling when your brain just completely freezes and you can't process words anymore?" "Yeah, that happened." I sat there holding my phone, a noodle hanging from my chopsticks, my mouth opening and closing like a goldfish that had suddenly developed existential dread. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. "Did you just say Miranda is suing me? Miranda Coleman? My ex-wife Miranda? The woman who left me 3 years ago for a guy whose entire personality is protein powder?" "That's the one," Lucas confirmed, and I could hear the barely suppressed amusement in his voice. "And wait, it gets better. She's suing you for fraud, undue influence, and elder exploitation." "What?" I actually shouted that, and my neighbor banged on the wall again. I lowered my voice to an aggressive whisper. "For what? Fraud? What could I have possibly defrauded her of? Her Netflix password? Because she changed that when she left, so that ship has sailed." Lucas was definitely laughing now. "She and Mr. Trent Davis are claiming that you manipulated your grandfather, Henry Whitmore, into leaving you his entire estate. They're alleging that you isolated him from his family, took advantage of his advanced age and supposedly declining mental faculties, and essentially conned an elderly man out of $30 million. I sat there in stunned silence for a solid 15 seconds. Then I started laughing. Not a normal laugh, a hysterical, borderline unhinged laugh that probably confirmed to my neighbors that I'd finally lost it. "Let me get this straight," I said when I could finally breathe again. "Miranda, who never met my grandfather, who refused to attend a single family dinner in 5 years of marriage, who couldn't even be bothered to send a sympathy card when he died, is now claiming that I isolated him from his family." That appears to be the crux of their argument, yes. His family? What family? Grandpa hadn't spoken to anyone except me since like 2001 because everyone else bored him to tears. His own son, my dad, moved to Arizona and calls once a year on Christmas. His brother died in 1998. Who exactly am I supposed to have isolated him from? The mailman. I'm just reading what the complaint says, Marcus. And Trent? Trent is involved in this. The guy who thinks estate is a type of car is filing a lawsuit about estate law. He's listed as a co-plaintiff. Apparently they're engaged now, so he's claiming some kind of— Honestly, I'm not even sure what he's claiming. The legal argument is pretty thin. Actually, calling it thin is generous. It's basically transparent. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to process this absolute insanity. When did she file this? It's dated 3 days ago. I got served this morning. 3 days ago, I repeated slowly. Lucas, 3 days ago Miranda posted on Instagram about new beginnings with the love of my life. I know because my cousin sent me a screenshot with like 15 laughing emojis. She posted a picture of her and Trent on a boat with champagne, with some caption about manifestation and living her best life. So she filed a lawsuit claiming emotional damages and family trauma the same week she posted vacation photos, Lucas said dryly. That's certainly a choice. That's not a choice. That's evidence of a complete break from reality. I stood up, started pacing my tiny apartment, which took approximately 4 steps in any direction. How did she even find out about the inheritance? Public records, probably. Estate filings are publicly accessible, and your grandfather's passing made the papers. Once his will went through probate, anyone could look it up if they knew where to look. So she went digging. Appears that way. I laughed again, but this time it was the cold kind, the kind that comes when you realize someone you used to love has turned into someone you don't even recognize. She left me when I had nothing. Literally nothing. She walked out with a sticky note, Lucas. A sticky note that said, "You're a good man, but I need passion." Now suddenly she finds out I inherited money, and she's what? Crawling back? Filing lawsuits? What's her endgame here? Best guess? She either wants a settlement to go away quietly, or she actually thinks she can convince a judge that she's entitled to a portion of your inheritance. Based on what legal principle? The "I regret my life choices" clause. I've seen people try to win cases on less, Lucas admitted. But Marcus, between you and me, this is a garbage lawsuit. It's going to get tossed. She has no standing, no evidence, and from what you've told me about your relationship with your grandfather, she has absolutely no case whatsoever. So why is she doing this? Because people get weird about money, especially large amounts of money, and especially when they feel like they somehow deserve it. I thought about that for a moment, about Miranda sitting in whatever overpriced apartment she and Trent were renting, scrolling through public records, seeing those numbers, doing the math, realizing that if she'd stuck around just a little bit longer, if she'd faked interest in my family for just a few more years, she could have been sitting on millions instead of splitting rent with a guy whose career peaked at fitness boot camp instructor. When's the first hearing? I asked. 2 weeks. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Judge Harold Reynolds presiding. Reynolds? I know that name. Wasn't he friends with Grandpa? Colleagues, yes. They served on the bench together back in the 90s. I already checked. He doesn't have to recuse himself since he's not personally involved in the estate, but he definitely knew your grandfather professionally. A slow smile spread across my face. So Miranda is going to stand in front of a judge who actually knew Henry Whitmore and try to claim that I manipulated him? That does appear to be her strategy, yes. Lucas, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I once watched Trent try to open a door that clearly said pull for a full minute. Lucas laughed. I'm not worried about the case, Marcus. It's frivolous, and any competent judge will see that immediately. I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is happening, and to prepare yourself for seeing her in court. Oh, I'm prepared, I said, and I meant it. Trust me, I'm very prepared. After I hung up, I sat back down on my couch and finished my lo mein, which had gone cold, but I ate it anyway, because wasting food is a sin, and also I was too distracted to care. I thought about Miranda and Trent, probably celebrating right now, probably convinced they'd found some brilliant loophole, some way to cash in on my good fortune. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Grandpa Henry had prepared me for exactly this kind of situation. He'd warned me about people who only show up when there's something in it for them. He'd taught me to document everything, to keep records, to never assume that people wouldn't surprise you with their greed. I walked over to my closet and pulled out a box I'd been keeping since the divorce. Inside were 3 years' worth of receipts, text messages I'd backed up, emails, calendar entries. Every time Miranda had canceled on a family dinner, every excuse she'd made, every time she'd asked Grandpa for money and then ghosted him when he said no, every screenshot of every social media post she'd made while claiming to be too overwhelmed to meet my family. Grandpa had told me, keep receipts on everyone who betrays you. Well, Miranda, I thought, setting the box on my kitchen counter. I kept every single one. 2 weeks suddenly felt very, very far away. All right, so before we get to the absolute massacre that was about to happen in that courtroom, I need to give you the full backstory on my marriage to Miranda, because you can't truly appreciate the poetic justice of what's coming without understanding just how spectacularly she played herself. And trust me, this woman wrote, directed, and starred in her own downfall, and she doesn't even know the final act yet. I met Miranda Coleman 7 years ago at a coffee shop in Rittenhouse Square, back when I was still trying to convince myself that my computer repair business was going to take off any day now. Spoiler alert, it did not take off. In fact, It crashed and burned so hard I'm pretty sure the wreckage is still smoking somewhere. But anyway, I was sitting there with my laptop, trying to figure out why Mrs. Henderson's desktop kept blue screening, when this absolutely gorgeous woman sat down at the table next to me and ordered something complicated involving oat milk and 3 different syrups. She had that look, you know, the one, where everything about her screamed, "I'm low maintenance," but you could tell she spent 2 hours getting ready. The messy bun that took 15 minutes to perfect, the natural makeup that required 12 products, the yoga pants that cost more than my rent. But she smiled at me, commented on my vintage Phillies t-shirt, and somehow we ended up talking for 3 hours about absolutely nothing important. "I love that you're so passionate about helping people with their technology problems," she'd said, tilting her head in that way that probably worked on every guy she'd ever met. "It's so humble. You have such a beautiful, grounded spirit." Humble. Grounded. Looking back, those were red flags bigger than the ones they fly at the beach when there's a hurricane coming. But I was 27 and stupid, and she was paying attention to me. So I ignored every single warning sign my brain tried to send. Translation of what she actually meant: "I think you're a broke loser who will be easy to control and won't question me when I max out your credit cards." We dated for 6 months before I proposed, because apparently I was speedrunning bad decisions that year. The wedding was small: my family, her family, a few friends, and about 40 people on her side that I'd never met and would never see again. Grandpa Henry came, wore his best suit, shook my hand, and pulled me aside before the ceremony. "Son," he said quietly, "are you absolutely sure about this?" "Of course," I'd said, confused. "I love her, Grandpa." He'd looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. Love is important, but pay attention to how someone treats people who can't do anything for them. That tells you who they really are. I'd laughed it off, told him he was being overprotective, promised him he'd love Miranda once he got to know her better. He'd just nodded, kissed me on the forehead like he used to when I was a kid, and said, "I hope you're right." Narrator voice: I was not right. The first year of marriage was fine, or at least I thought it was fine, which in retrospect means it definitely wasn't fine and I was just oblivious. Miranda worked as a social media consultant, which as far as I could tell meant she took selfies and called it market research. I was still doing computer repair and had just picked up some maintenance work on the side to make ends meet. Because, surprise, fixing computers for old people who keep clicking on email scams doesn't actually pay very well. But Miranda had expensive taste: designer purses, premium gym memberships, monthly spa appointments, a skincare routine that required more products than a CVS checkout line. And somehow, despite her consulting business, I was the one paying for all of it. "Babe, I need this moisturizer," she'd say, holding up a tiny jar that cost $140. "It's an investment in my skin health." "That's like a week of groceries," I'd point out. "Don't be cheap, Marcus. Self-care isn't selfish." Right. Self-care. That's what we were calling burning through my paycheck before the bills were paid. Every Sunday, I'd go to Grandpa's house for dinner. It was our thing, had been since I was a teenager. We'd play chess, argue about politics, watch whatever game was on, just hang out. And every Sunday, I'd invite Miranda. "I can't this week, babe. I have a headache." I promised Chloe I'd help her with something. "I'm so stressed with work, I just need to decompress." "Your grandfather is kind of intimidating, you know? I just need more time." Excuse after excuse after excuse. For 5 years, she came to maybe 3 Sunday dinners total, and 2 of those were Christmas and Thanksgiving when she basically had no choice. She never called him, never asked about him, acted like my family was some kind of inconvenient obligation that interfered with her real life. Meanwhile, she expected me to attend every single one of her family events. Her mom's birthday, her dad's retirement party, her cousin's baby shower, her aunt's book club. I showed up to all of them, smiled, made small talk, pretended I enjoyed listening to her mother explain for the 15th time how Miranda could have been a model if she'd wanted to. Year 3 was when Trent entered the picture, though I didn't know it at the time. Miranda suddenly needed a gym membership to the fanciest fitness center in Philadelphia, the kind where they have eucalyptus-scented towels and water with cucumber slices. She started going every morning at 6 a.m., which should have been my first clue because Miranda had never voluntarily woken up before 9 in her entire life. "I'm just really getting into fitness," she'd say, wearing matching workout sets that cost more than my car payment. It's important to prioritize health. She started talking about this amazing trainer who was really helping her reach her goals. Trent this, Trent that. Trent says high-intensity intervals are the key to metabolic health. Trent recommended this protein powder. Trent thinks I should try hot yoga. I'm not an idiot. I mean, clearly I was a bit of an idiot or I would have seen this coming. But even I started to notice that she was spending more time talking about her trainer than she was talking to me. She'd come home from the gym all energized and glowing, then barely acknowledge me for the rest of the day. Maybe you should work out with us sometime, she suggested once, which was hilarious because I was working 60-hour weeks fixing air conditioners and hauling equipment upstairs. I was getting plenty of exercise, thanks. I'm good, I'd said. But maybe you could skip one session and come to Grandpa's for dinner this week? He's been asking about you. She'd rolled her eyes, practice for the Olympic-level performance she'd given the courtroom 3 years later, and said, Marcus, your grandfather barely knows I exist. Stop trying to guilt-trip me. That stung, mainly because it was partially true. Grandpa barely knew she existed because she'd never given him the chance to know her. Year 4 was when things really started falling apart. Miranda's consulting business somehow required more and more funding but produced fewer and fewer results. She needed a new laptop, a ring light, a professional camera, editing software, a website, business cards made from recycled bamboo, or some nonsense. I was paying for everything, working 2 jobs, exhausted all the time, while she posted Instagram stories about building her empire and manifesting abundance. Meanwhile, my relationship with Grandpa was the only thing keeping me sane. Every Sunday, without fail, I'd show up. Sometimes I'd be so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but I'd go anyway because that's what you do for people you love. We'd play chess. He won probably 70% of the time, and he'd ask me how I was really doing, not the polite version, but the truth. Marriage is hard, I'd admit sometimes, but we're working on it. He'd nod, move his knight, and say something like, son, you can't work on a marriage alone. Takes 2 people showing up. I'd deflect, make excuses, change the subject. But he was right. He was always right. Year 5, Miranda's best friend, Chloe, let something slip at a barbecue. We were all a few drinks in, and she made a comment about how it must be nice that Miranda's finally found someone who matches her energy. What do you mean? I'd asked. Chloe's face had gone white. Oh, I just meant, you know, with her fitness journey and everything. But I knew. In that moment, I absolutely knew. All those early morning gym sessions, all that talk about Trent, all the time she'd come home late because she lost track of time doing cardio. It wasn't cardio. Well, technically maybe it was, but not the kind that happens on a treadmill. I didn't confront her right away. I watched, paid attention, noticed things I'd been ignoring. The way she hit her phone screen. The way she'd smile at texts and then quickly delete them. The new lingerie that I never saw her wear around me. The excuses about being tired whenever I tried to initiate anything physical. One morning, I woke up to find a sticky note on the bathroom mirror. Not even a real conversation, not even the decency of a face-to-face breakup. Just a yellow post-it note stuck next to the toothpaste holder. Marcus, you're a good man, but I need passion. I need someone who understands me on a deeper level. I'm moving out today while you're at work. I hope you find happiness. M. That was it. 5 years of marriage, summarized in 4 sentences on a 3-inch square of paper. No explanation, no apology, nothing about the 5 years I'd supported her dreams while mine died on the vine. Nothing about the credit card debt she'd left me with. Nothing about the fact that she'd been cheating on me for at least a year. I called Grandpa. Didn't even say hello, just she left. I'm sorry, son, he said quietly. Come over. Bring whatever you need. I stayed with him for 2 months while I got myself together, found a new apartment, started rebuilding my life. He never said, I told you so. Never lectured me. Just let me heal and told me the same thing over and over. Don't chase people who run towards stupidity. Best advice I ever got. And now, 3 years later, here we were. Miranda had chosen Trent, chosen his abs over my reliability, chosen passion over partnership. And I'd chosen to move forward, to keep showing up for the people who mattered, to maintain my integrity even when it would have been easier to become bitter. The universe was about to reward one of those choices and punish the other. Karma, as it turns out, has perfect timing. So there we were, back in courtroom 3B, And let me tell you, the energy in that room was absolutely electric. You know that feeling you get right before something spectacular is about to happen? Like when you're watching a cooking competition and someone's souffle is clearly about to collapse. Or when you see someone confidently walking toward a glass door they think is open. That beautiful moment of anticipation before disaster strikes. Yeah, that's exactly what this felt like, except I was the only one who knew the disaster was coming. Miranda and Trent sat at the plaintiff's table looking like they'd just won the lottery and were waiting for someone to hand them the oversized check. Miranda had gone full power woman, with her outfit, a navy pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, hair blown out to perfection, makeup applied with the precision of someone who'd watched approximately 400 YouTube tutorials. She looked like she was about to give a TED Talk on manifesting success through positive vibrations or whatever nonsense she was into these days. Trent, bless his heart, was wearing a suit that fit him about as well as I'd fit into a pair of skinny jeans. The shoulders were too tight, the pants were too short, and he kept tugging at his collar like it was personally attacking him. His hair was gelled within an inch of its life, giving him that wet look that guys think makes them look sophisticated, but actually makes them look like they just emerged from a swimming pool. He was also wearing cologne. I could smell it from across the room. Some aggressive scent that probably had a name like Alpha Predator or Extreme Masculine Force. Their lawyer, Richard Pike, was exactly what you'd picture when you think of a sleazy attorney who advertises on bus benches. Mid-50s, spray tan that was just a shade too orange, teeth so white they were practically glowing, and a suit that screamed. I peaked in 1997, and I'm still coasting on that energy. He had one of those faces that's permanently set to smug, like he was constantly thinking about how clever he was even when he absolutely wasn't. Lucas leaned over to me as we watched Pike dramatically arrange his papers on the table, making a big show of everything like he was preparing to argue in front of the Supreme Court instead of a routine family court hearing. $20 says he opens with a quote, Lucas whispered. No bet, I whispered back. Guys like that always open with a quote. Probably something about justice or truth that he found on brainyquote.com. Judge Reynolds entered, and we all stood. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and surveyed the courtroom with the expression of a man who'd seen every possible variation of human stupidity and was perpetually unimpressed by all of it. His eyes lingered on me for just a moment, and I swear I saw the tiniest hint of recognition. He'd known Grandpa. He knew what kind of man Henry Whitmore was. This was already not going to go well for Miranda, and she had absolutely no idea. Be seated, Judge Reynolds said. Let's begin. Mr. Pike, I understand you're representing the plaintiffs. Pike stood up so fast I'm surprised he didn't give himself whiplash. He buttoned his jacket, which didn't need buttoning, straightened his tie, which didn't need straightening, and cleared his throat with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for Shakespeare in the Park. Yes, Your Honor, I am. And if I may, I'd like to begin by reminding this courtroom that we are here today because justice, as the great Martin Luther King Jr. once said, is. I leaned over to Lucas. Called it. What love looks like in public. And my clients, Your Honor, have been denied justice. They have been victimized by a calculated, manipulative scheme designed to exploit an elderly man in his most vulnerable moments. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Grandpa Henry, vulnerable? The man had literally negotiated a real estate deal from his hospital bed during that pneumonia scare. He'd once made a lawyer cry during a deposition just by raising one eyebrow. Calling him vulnerable was like calling a great white shark cuddly. Pike was on a roll now, pacing in front of the judge's bench like he was performing for an invisible audience. Your Honor, my client, Ms. Miranda Coleman, was married to the defendant for 5 years. 5 years of devotion, of partnership, of building a life together. And during that time, the defendant systematically isolated his grandfather from his family, from his loved ones, from anyone who might question his growing influence over the elderly man's affairs. Judge Reynolds was writing something down, his expression completely neutral. I couldn't tell if he was taking actual notes or just doodling to maintain his sanity. The defendant, Pike continued, and I noticed he was very carefully not using my name. Probably some lawyer trick to dehumanize me. Used his position as the primary caregiver. Objection, Lucas said calmly, not even standing up. Mr. Whitmore was never his grandfather's primary caregiver. Henry Whitmore lived independently in his own home with occasional assistance from a part-time housekeeper until 2 weeks before his death. Sustained, Judge Reynolds said. Mr. Pike, stick to facts that are actually in evidence. Pike's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. Very well. The defendant maintained an unusually close relationship with his grandfather, visiting him weekly. Weekly visits with a family member are unusual? Judge Reynolds interrupted, looking up from his notes. I must have missed that memo. A few people in the gallery, mostly court staff and a couple of lawyers waiting for other cases, snickered. Pike's face was turning red, which clashed spectacularly with his orange spray tan, creating a color palette that can only be described as Halloween nightmare. What I mean, Your Honor, is that the defendant leveraged this relationship to gain undue influence over his grandfather's estate planning. He deliberately excluded Ms. Coleman from family gatherings, prevented her from forming a relationship with Mr. Henry Whitmore, and ultimately manipulated the elderly man into leaving him the entire $30 million estate. Objection, Lucas said, this time standing up. Your Honor, the plaintiff was never excluded from anything. In fact, Mr. Marcus Whitmore has documentation showing repeated invitations to family dinners, all of which the plaintiff declined. We'll get to evidence in due course, Judge Reynolds said. Mr. Pike, do you have anything else for your opening statement, or are we done with the theatrical portion of the morning? I love this judge already. Pike, clearly flustered that his dramatic performance wasn't having the desired effect, wrapped up quickly. Your Honor, we will prove that the defendant is not entitled to this inheritance, that it was obtained through fraud and manipulation, and that my clients deserve compensation for the emotional and financial damages they have suffered. He sat down, and Miranda reached over to squeeze his arm, giving him an encouraging smile like he'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address instead of a barely coherent conspiracy theory. Then it was Miranda's turn to testify, and oh boy, this was where things got really entertaining. She took the stand wearing an expression of practiced sadness, the kind you see in those pharmaceutical commercials where they're trying to sell you antidepressants. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Irony was working overtime today and settled into the witness chair like she was preparing for a magazine interview about overcoming adversity. Pike started with softball questions. How long were you married? 5 years. Did you love the defendant? Very much. How would you describe your relationship with his family? I tried so hard to be part of his family, but Marcus, he made it very difficult. I nearly choked. Lucas put a hand on my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm and let them dig their own grave. Can you elaborate on that? Pike asked, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Miranda took a deep breath, and I swear to God, she actually managed to make her eyes well up. Where had she learned to cry on command? Was there a class? A YouTube tutorial? Marcus was very protective of his grandfather, almost possessive. Whenever I suggested visiting him, Marcus would make excuses. He said his grandfather was tired, or busy, or not feeling well. He made me feel like I wasn't welcome. This was amazing. She was literally rewriting history in real time, and she was doing it under oath. And how did this make you feel? Pike asked, because apparently we were in therapy now instead of a courtroom. Excluded. Hurt. Like I wasn't good enough to be part of his family. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Oscar-worthy, honestly. I just wanted to know his grandfather. I wanted to be a good granddaughter-in-law. But Marcus kept me at a distance. And do you believe this was intentional? I do. Now, looking back, I realize he was isolating his grandfather so that he could manipulate him without anyone questioning it. He turned Henry against me, against everyone, so that when it came time to write the will, there was no one left to inherit except Marcus. The way she said Grandpa's first name, like they'd been close, like she had any right to use it familiarly, made my blood boil. She'd never earned that right. She'd never even tried. Pike nodded solemnly. And during your marriage, did the defendant ever discuss his grandfather's finances with you? All the time. He was obsessed with the idea that his grandfather was wealthy. He'd talk about the properties, the investments, what everything might be worth someday. It was uncomfortable, honestly, like he was waiting for his grandfather to die. I felt Lucas tense beside me. That was a dangerous accusation, the kind that could actually do damage if a jury believed it. But this wasn't a jury trial, it was just Judge Reynolds, and he was watching Miranda with the expression of someone listening to a sales pitch for a timeshare. No further questions. Pike said, sitting down with a satisfied smile. Now came the fun part. Lucas stood up, took his time walking to the podium, and smiled pleasantly at Miranda. She smiled back, probably thinking she'd nailed her performance, and this was just a formality. Ms. Coleman, Lucas began, his voice friendly and conversational. You testified that you wanted to visit Mr. Henry Whitmore, but that my client prevented you from doing so. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. And you said this happened frequently throughout your 5-year marriage? Yes. Lucas nodded, like this was all making perfect sense. So just to be clear, you're saying that you actively wanted to spend time with your husband's elderly grandfather, to build a relationship with him, but you were prevented from doing so? Exactly. Interesting. Lucas picked up a piece of paper from his table. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Lucas stood there holding Exhibit A like it was the Holy Grail, and I could see Miranda's confidence starting to crack just a little bit around the edges. Her smile was still plastered on, but there was something in her eyes now, a tiny flicker of uncertainty, like she was suddenly remembering that actions have consequences and lies have receipts. Ms. Coleman, Lucas continued in that same pleasant, conversational tone that somehow made everything he said sound more devastating. Before we get to this exhibit, I just want to clarify something. You said you've been with Mr. Trent Davis since your fitness boot camp. When exactly did you start attending that boot camp? Miranda blinked, clearly not expecting that question. I'm not sure of the exact date. Let me help you remember. According to your own Instagram posts, which are public, by the way, you posted your first photo at Elite Fitness Philadelphia on March 15th, 4 years ago. Does that sound right? I suppose so, yes. And you filed for divorce from my client on July 22nd, 3 years ago. Correct? Yes. So that's roughly 16 months between when you met Mr. Davis and when you left my client. Does that timeline sound accurate? You could see the math happening behind her eyes, see her trying to figure out where this was going and how bad it was going to be. I guess so, but I don't see what that has to. We'll get there, Lucas said smoothly. Now, you testified that you wanted to visit Mr. Henry Whitmore, but my client prevented you. I'm holding here a copy of text message exchanges between you and Mr. Marcus Whitmore. These are from your phone records, which we were able to subpoena. May I approach, Your Honor? Judge Reynolds nodded, and Lucas handed copies to the judge, to Pike, and kept one for himself. I watched Miranda's face go from tan to pale in about 3 seconds flat. She knew what was in those texts. She knew exactly what was coming. Let me read a few of these aloud, if I may, Lucas said. This is from September 10th, 6 years ago. My client texts you. Grandpa asked if you wanted to come to dinner Sunday. Says he makes the best lasagna in Philadelphia and wants to prove it to you. Your response, can't babe, getting my hair done. Tell him rain check. Miranda shifted in her seat. I was busy that day. Oh, we have more. Lucas interrupted cheerfully. October 3rd, same year. My client. Grandpa's birthday dinner this Sunday at 6. Would mean a lot if you came. Your response, birthday dinners are so boring. Can we just send a card? A few people in the gallery gasped. Even Trent looked uncomfortable, which was impressive because I didn't think he had the emotional range to feel secondhand embarrassment. Lucas flipped a page. November 20th. My client. Thanksgiving at Grandpa's. He's really looking forward to meeting you. Your response, do we have to? I already committed to my family's thing. Those texts are out of context, Miranda said, her voice rising slightly. You can't just. Context. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Let's talk about context then. Your Honor, I have here a complete record of every invitation my client extended to Ms. Coleman over their 5-year marriage. In total, he invited her to 53 Sunday dinners, 7 holidays, for birthdays, and 1 hospital visit when Mr. Whitmore had pneumonia. She attended 3 Sunday dinners, 2 of which were mandatory holidays, and 0 of everything else. Judge Reynolds was reading through the text messages, and his expression had gone from neutral to something resembling barely controlled annoyance. Ms. Coleman, these messages appear to directly contradict your earlier testimony. I can explain, Miranda started, but Lucas wasn't done. Actually, Your Honor, it gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. May I present Exhibit B? Oh man, this was the good stuff. Lucas pulled out a stack of printouts that looked like they'd come from social media, and I knew exactly what they were because I'd helped him compile them. Every single Instagram post, Facebook check-in, and Twitter update Miranda had made during times when she'd claimed to be too busy or too tired to visit Grandpa. This is from the same day as that September 10th text, Lucas said, holding up a printout. The day Ms. Coleman said she couldn't come to dinner because she was getting her hair done. Here's her Instagram post from that evening. Girls' night at Coda. Best cocktails in the city. Complete with a photo of her at a bar with 6 friends. Timestamp 7:45 p.m. Miranda's lawyer jumped up. Objection. What is this, social media stalking? It's publicly available information, Lucas said calmly. Ms. Coleman chose to post these photos publicly. I'm simply providing evidence that contradicts her testimony. Overruled, Judge Reynolds said, and he actually sounded interested now. Continue, Mr. Shaw. Lucas went through post after post, each one more damning than the last. The time she said she had a migraine but posted pictures from a wine tasting. The time she claimed to be working on a major project but checked into a spa for a full day of treatments. The Thanksgiving she skipped because of her family's thing that turned out to be a weekend trip to Miami with Trent. Yeah, that one raised some eyebrows. And here's my personal favorite, Lucas said, holding up another printout. This is from April 12th, 2 years ago. My client invited Ms. Coleman to the hospital because his grandfather had pneumonia and the doctors weren't sure he'd make it through the night. Her response, and I quote, "That's really sad, but I can't handle hospital vibes right now. Send him my love." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the stenographer had stopped typing and was just staring at Miranda with open disgust. That same night, Lucas continued, Ms. Coleman posted this photo to Instagram. Date night with my king, featuring her and Mr. Davis at an expensive steakhouse. My client was at the hospital, holding his grandfather's hand, thinking he might die. And Ms. Coleman was taking selfies with her personal trainer. That's enough, Pike shouted, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward. Your Honor, this is character assassination. None of this is relevant to. It's extremely relevant, Lucas shot back. The plaintiff claims she was excluded from the family and prevented from forming a relationship with Mr. Whitmore. I'm proving that she actively chose not to participate, repeatedly and consistently, for years. You can't claim someone isolated you from a relationship you never wanted in the first place. Judge Reynolds held up a hand. Mr. Pike, sit down. The objection is overruled. Mr. Shaw, proceed. Miranda was crying now, but these weren't the pretty, controlled tears from earlier. These were real tears, mascara running, face-crumpling tears of someone who'd just realized they'd been caught in a massive lie under oath. Lucas walked back to our table, picked up another folder, and returned to the podium. Now, Ms. Coleman, let's talk about your relationship with Mr. Trent Davis. You testified that you've known him for 4 years, correct? Yes, she whispered. And when did your romantic relationship with him begin? After my divorce. After? Are you sure about that? Silence. Because I have here screenshots from a backup Instagram account you maintained under the username FitQueenAdventures. Private account. Only 47 followers, but one of those followers was your friend Chloe, who was very cooperative when we explained this was for a legal proceeding. Miranda looked like she was going to throw up. Trent had gone completely white, his spray tan the only thing giving him any color. Lucas held up printout after printout. Miranda and Trent at the gym, kissing in the parking lot, dated 8 months before the divorce. Miranda and Trent at a hotel, captioned, Weekend Getaway with My Person, dated 6 months before the divorce. Miranda and Trent at the beach, clearly couple Y, dated 4 months before the divorce. So let me ask you again, Ms. Coleman, and remember you're under oath, Lucas said quietly. When did your romantic relationship with Mr. Davis begin? She couldn't speak. She literally couldn't form words. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Your Honor, Lucas said, I think the evidence speaks for itself. The plaintiff committed perjury when she claimed to want a relationship with Mr. Whitmore. She committed perjury when she claimed my client isolated her. And she just committed perjury when she claimed her relationship with Mr. Davis began after the divorce. Everything about this case is based on lies. I have more, Lucas said, and I loved how calm he sounded, like he was ordering coffee instead of systematically destroying someone's credibility. Ms. Coleman, do you remember asking Mr. Henry Whitmore for money? I never, Miranda started. Exhibit C, Lucas said, holding up more papers. Text messages between Ms. Coleman and Mr. Henry Whitmore. The phone number is confirmed to be his. These messages show Ms. Coleman reaching out to Mr. Whitmore directly, bypassing my client entirely, on 6 separate occasions. Let me read one. Hi, Henry. Marcus talks about you all the time. I'm starting a skincare line and looking for investors. Would love to chat about opportunities. Judge Reynolds looked up sharply. She contacted him directly asking for money. Multiple times, Your Honor. And each time Mr. Whitmore politely declined. And each time she stopped responding to his messages. He invited her to lunch 3 times after these exchanges. She never responded. He invited her to Christmas dinner. No response. The only time Ms. Coleman showed any interest in communicating with Mr. Whitmore was when she wanted financial backing. This is absurd. Pike finally found his voice. These messages could be. They're authenticated, Lucas said flatly. Phone records, timestamps, metadata, everything. Would you like me to call in a digital forensics expert to testify? Because I brought one, and he's waiting outside. Pike sat down, defeated. Lucas turned back to Miranda. So, just to summarize, you never wanted a relationship with Mr. Whitmore. You repeatedly declined invitations. You were cheating on my client for at least a year before the divorce. You only contacted Mr. Whitmore when you wanted money. And you're now claiming you deserve part of an inheritance from a man you couldn't be bothered to visit even once when he was dying. Is that accurate? Miranda was full-on sobbing now. We needed. It's not fair that Marcus gets everything. Life isn't fair, Miss Coleman, Judge Reynolds said coldly. But the law is. And the law says you have no claim to this estate. The judge looked at Pike with an expression that could freeze hell. Counselor, is there anything else? Or are we done wasting the court's time? Pike stood up weakly. No, Your Honor. Good. Because I have some things to say. After watching Lucas absolutely demolish Miranda's entire case with the legal equivalent of a tactical nuke, Judge Reynolds called a 15-minute recess. I think he needed time to compose himself and figure out how to professionally express what probably translated to, "Are you freaking kidding me with this nonsense?" in proper legal language. Miranda practically ran out of the courtroom, Trent following behind her like a confused golden retriever who just realized his owner was actually terrible. Pike gathered his papers with the energy of a man contemplating early retirement and perhaps a career change to something less soul-crushing, like being a DMV employee or a phone company customer service representative. Lucas and I stayed seated. He was making notes, completely calm, while I was trying to process the fact that I'd just watched my ex-wife commit perjury multiple times and then get caught in spectacular fashion. That went well, Lucas said without looking up from his legal pad. That was beautiful, I replied. I mean, I knew we had the evidence, but watching you actually use it, that was like watching a master chef work. Except instead of food, you were serving justice with a side of humiliation. Wait until you testify, Lucas said. That's when we really drive it home. When we reconvened, the energy in the courtroom had completely shifted. Miranda looked like she'd been crying in the bathroom. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes were red, and she'd lost that artificial confidence she'd walked in with. Trent looked like he was seriously reconsidering his life choices, which, to be fair, he should have been doing for the past 4 years. Pike looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else on the planet. Judge Reynolds settled back into his seat and looked directly at Lucas. Mr. Shaw, does the defense wish to call any witnesses? Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Marcus Whitmore. This was it. My moment to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which was going to be way more satisfying than I'd imagined. I stood up, walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore the oath. The same oath Miranda had sworn about 30 minutes ago before lying her face off. The difference was, I actually meant it. Lucas started with the basics. Mr. Whitmore, can you tell the court about your relationship with your grandfather, Henry Whitmore? I took a deep breath and looked directly at Judge Reynolds, not at Miranda, not at her lawyer, just at the judge who'd known Grandpa and would understand what I was about to say. My grandfather raised me, I began. My parents got divorced when I was 12, and neither of them really had their act together enough to be full-time parents. Dad moved to Arizona. Mom was dealing with her own stuff, and Grandpa just stepped up. He didn't have to. He was already in his 60s, already retired, Could have been playing golf or traveling or doing whatever retired judges do. But he took me in, made sure I did my homework, taught me how to be a decent human being. And did that relationship continue into your adulthood? Lucas asked. Every single week. Sunday dinners were our thing. We'd play chess. He beat me probably 70% of the time, even when he was 86. We'd watch whatever game was on. We'd talk about everything from politics to philosophy to why the Phillies can never seem to get their act together. He was my best friend, honestly. The one person I could always count on to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. And did you invite your ex-wife, Miss Coleman, to these dinners? Every single time. For 5 years, I invited her. Every Sunday. I'd say Grandpa wants us to come over, and she'd have an excuse. She was tired, she had plans, she had a headache, she had to work on her business. After the first year, Grandpa stopped asking if she was coming. He'd just set 2 places at the table instead of 3. Did that bother him? I paused, remembering. He never said it out loud, but yeah, I think it did. Grandpa was old school. Family was everything to him. The fact that my wife didn't care enough to show up, didn't care enough to even try to know him, I think that hurt. But he never complained. He just accepted it and moved on. Lucas nodded. Now, Miss Coleman testified that you prevented her from visiting your grandfather. Is that true? No. That's a complete lie. I begged her to come. I told her how much it would mean to him, how much it would mean to me. She just didn't care. And honestly, after a while, I stopped pushing because I realized Grandpa deserved better than someone who was only showing up because she felt obligated. Did you ever discuss your grandfather's wealth with Miss Coleman? This was important, and I wanted to get it right. Never in the way she described. Yeah, I knew Grandpa had money. He owned properties. He'd been successful. It wasn't a secret. But I never sat around calculating what I might inherit someday. That's disgusting. The thought never even crossed my mind because I wasn't spending time with him for his money. I was spending time with him because I loved him. I saw Miranda look down at her hands. Good. She should feel ashamed. When did you learn about the full extent of your grandfather's estate? Lucas asked. At the reading of his will, about 3 hours after his funeral. I thought I was going to get his chess set, maybe his watch. When the lawyer told me I was inheriting $30 million, I literally thought it was a mistake. I asked him to repeat it 3 times because I couldn't process it. And what was your reaction? I smiled, remembering that surreal moment in Bernie's office. Honestly, after the shock wore off, I laughed. Because 3 months earlier, Miranda had left me thinking I was a broke maintenance worker with no prospects. She left me for a guy with abs and no ambition because she thought that was a better bet. And then Grandpa left me everything. And I realized the universe has a sense of humor after all. A few people in the gallery chuckled. Even Judge Reynolds cracked a tiny smile. Did your grandfather have any relationship with Miss Coleman? Lucas asked. He tried. After the text messages, she sent him asking for money. Which, by the way, I didn't know about until we pulled phone records for this case. He invited her to lunch. 3 separate times. She never responded. He invited her to Christmas dinner 2 years in a row. Nothing. The only time she reached out to him was when she wanted him to invest in her skincare line, which I'm pretty sure never actually existed beyond some Pinterest boards and wishful thinking. And how did he feel about that? He told me, son, people who only call when they need something aren't family, they're salespeople. He wasn't angry about it, just disappointed. He'd seen enough people in his life try to use him that it didn't surprise him anymore. But I know it hurt him that my wife, the person I'd chosen to build a life with, couldn't even pretend to care about him unless there was money involved. Lucas walked back to his table and picked up a folder I recognized. This was the good stuff, the evidence that was going to seal this case shut tighter than a pickle jar. Mr. Whitmore, did your grandfather leave any instructions regarding his estate and his reasoning for his choices? He left a letter for me to read after he died. And what did that letter say? I pulled out the copy I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket, the one I'd read probably 50 times since that day in Bernie's office. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded it. He wrote, "You earned this inheritance. Not by being born into the family, not by sucking up to me, not by showing up at the end with flowers and fake tears. You earned it by having backbone. You showed up every Sunday for 20 years, even when you had better things to do. You called me every Wednesday evening, even when I know you were exhausted from work. You sat with me in the hospital during that pneumonia scare 3 years ago, and you never once asked about my will or my money. You came because you cared, and that's rarer than you think." My voice cracked a little, but I kept reading. "Everyone else in this family sees me as a bank account with a pulse. You saw me as Henry. That's worth more than all the money I made in my entire life. So here's your inheritance. Everything I built, everything I saved, everything I invested. Use it wisely. Use it well. And remember who showed up when everyone else left." The courtroom was completely silent. I looked up and saw that even the stenographer had tears in her eyes. "That's the kind of man my grandfather was," I said. "He didn't leave me his money because I manipulated him or because I isolated him. He left it to me because I loved him, because I showed up, because when he was sick and dying, I was the one holding his hand, not out there posting Instagram stories about living my best life." I looked directly at Miranda for the first time since I'd taken the stand. She was crying again, but this time I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little bit. She had 5 years to know him, I said. 5 years to be part of our family. 5 years to show up for Sunday dinner or call him on his birthday or just ask how he was doing. She chose not to. And now she's mad that she doesn't get to cash in on a relationship she never wanted in the first place. That's not how inheritance works. That's not how family works. That's not how anything works. Lucas let that hang in the air for a moment before asking his final question. "If you could say anything to your grandfather now, what would it be?" I smiled, thinking about all those Sunday dinners, all those chess games, all those conversations. "I'd say thank you. Thank you for teaching me that integrity matters more than money. Thank you for showing me what real family looks like. Thank you for loving me even when I made stupid decisions, like marrying someone who didn't deserve to know you. And thank you for being wise enough to leave your fortune to someone who loved you for who you were, not what you had." "No further questions, Your Honor." Pike stood up for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. He asked a few half-hearted questions about whether I'd known about the estate planning, whether Grandpa had ever seemed confused or easily influenced, whether I'd pressured him in any way. I answered honestly, no, and absolutely not. After about 5 minutes of getting nowhere, Pike sat down, looking defeated. Judge Reynolds leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes like he'd just witnessed something that had physically exhausted him. When he looked up, his expression was somewhere between disappointed and disgusted. "I knew Henry Whitmore," the judge said quietly. "Not well, but I knew him. We served on the bench together for several years. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that Henry Whitmore was one of the sharpest, most perceptive men I've ever met. The idea that anyone could manipulate him into doing anything he didn't want to do is laughable." He looked at Miranda with an expression that could have frozen nitrogen. "Miss Coleman, I've been a judge for 27 years. I've seen every kind of case, every kind of claim, every kind of person. And this is one of the most frivolous, baseless lawsuits I've ever had the misfortune of presiding over." Oh, this was about to be good. Judge Reynolds adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, the kind of sound that meant someone was about to get absolutely destroyed in the most professional way possible. After reviewing the evidence presented today, he began, his voice carrying that particular tone of judicial authority mixed with barely concealed irritation. "I find that the plaintiff's case is without merit. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Marcus Whitmore maintained a consistent, loving relationship with his grandfather for decades. The plaintiffs, however, demonstrated interest only when financial gain was involved." Miranda's face crumpled. Trent looked confused, like he was still trying to figure out what without merit meant. "Miss Coleman, your testimony was contradicted by your own text messages, social media posts, and phone records. You committed perjury multiple times on this stand. Not only is your case dismissed with prejudice, meaning you cannot refile, but you will also be responsible for paying Mr. Whitmore's legal fees, which I imagine are substantial." Pike tried to stand. "Your Honor, if we could." "Sit down, Mr. Pike. I'm not finished." 3 weeks after the courtroom victory, Mrs. Henderson, Grandpa's elderly neighbor, showed up at my door holding a weathered envelope. "Henry gave this to me years ago," she said softly. "Told me to give it to you when the time was right. I think now's the time." Inside were letters Grandpa had written but never sent. My hands trembled as I read his elegant handwriting. "Marcus, if she ever tries to come back, remember, forgiveness doesn't mean stupidity. You can forgive someone and still keep them out of your life. Another one read, love is showing up. You did. She didn't. That's all that matters. I framed that second letter and hung it above my desk in my new office. Yes, I finally moved out of that studio apartment. I took Grandpa's advice seriously, invested wisely, donated a chunk to veteran scholarships in his name, and started my own law firm. I called it Whitmore and Witt. The Witt part was intentional, and Grandpa would have loved it. 5 years later, life had become something I never thought possible during those dark days of eating ramen in my studio apartment with Abraham Lincoln staring down at me from the ceiling. The law firm was thriving beyond my wildest expectations, with 3 partners, 12 associates, and a reputation for taking cases that other firms wouldn't touch. We specialized in representing people who'd been betrayed, underestimated, or screwed over by someone they trusted. Turns out, there's no shortage of that particular brand of human garbage in the world, which meant business was unfortunately booming. I'd also gotten remarried, which surprised everyone including myself. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Miranda wasn't. She was a high school English teacher who drove a sensible Toyota, packed her own lunches, and thought manifesting abundance was something you did by working hard and being a decent person. Our first date was at a diner, and when the check came, she insisted on splitting it. I knew right then I was going to marry her. We had a small wedding, family, close friends, and yes, I invited her to meet everyone in my life before I proposed because I'd learned that lesson the hard way. She got along with everyone because she was genuine, kind, and actually showed up when she said she would. Revolutionary concept. We lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, nothing too flashy because neither of us needed to prove anything to anyone. We had a dog named Chester who was dumb as a box of rocks, but had more loyalty in his furry body than Miranda had in her entire existence. Life was good, better than good. Life was exactly what Grandpa had wanted for me, stable, happy, and built on a foundation of actual integrity rather than Instagram filters and protein shake philosophies. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from the mayor's office. Philadelphia was dedicating a new courthouse, and they wanted to name it after Grandpa, the Henry Whitmore Justice Center. They asked if I'd speak at the dedication ceremony, and obviously I said yes, because how do you say no to honoring the man who gave you everything, including the wisdom to recognize trash disguised as treasure? The day of the dedication was perfect, clear blue sky, crisp autumn air, the kind of day that makes you believe the universe occasionally gets things right. The new courthouse was beautiful, all glass and steel and modern architecture, with Grandpa's name carved in stone above the entrance. Inside the main lobby hung a massive portrait of him in his judicial robes, looking exactly how I remembered him, intelligent, dignified, and with just a hint of amusement in his eyes like he knew something you didn't. Hundreds of people showed up, judges, lawyers, politicians, former clerks, people whose lives Grandpa had touched over his 8 decades of being awesome. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and felt Sarah squeeze my hand before I stepped up to speak. My grandfather, Henry Whitmore, taught me 2 fundamental things. I began, my voice echoing through the marble lobby. First, always tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. Because lies have a way of catching up to you, usually in the most spectacular fashion possible. The crowd chuckled, and I saw several judges nodding knowingly. And second, I continued, unable to resist. Never date anyone who hashtags boss babe unironically. That's just asking for trouble. The laughter was genuine this time, the kind that comes from recognizing universal truth wrapped in humor. Sarah was shaking her head, but smiling. In all seriousness, I said, my tone shifting, Grandpa taught me that character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one's looking, when there's no reward, when the only person who knows is you. He taught me that showing up matters, that consistency matters, that loving people isn't about grand gestures or social media posts. It's about being there, week after week, year after year, whether it's convenient or not. I looked up at his portrait, and I swear those painted eyes were twinkling. He left me more than money. He left me a blueprint for how to be a decent human being in a world that doesn't always reward decency. He showed me that integrity is the only currency that actually appreciates over time. And he proved that the people who show up when you have nothing are worth more than all the people who show up when you have everything. I paused, gathering my thoughts for the final point I wanted to make. 5 years ago, I stood in a courtroom and watched someone try to claim they deserved a piece of his legacy without ever earning it. They thought family was about biology or marriage certificates or legal entitlement. But Grandpa knew better. Family is about showing up. It's about choice. It's about proving through your actions, day after day, that you actually give a damn. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. So today, as we dedicate this building in his honor, I want everyone who walks through these doors to remember what Henry Whitmore actually stood for. Not wealth or power or prestige, though he had all three, but integrity, consistency, showing up, telling the truth even when it costs you, being there for people who can't offer you anything in return except their love and respect. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. And maybe, just maybe, being smart enough to recognize when someone's only interested in your bank account and not your Sunday dinners. That's wisdom worth more than $30 million, trust me. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and the photographs and the speeches from people who'd worked with Grandpa, I found myself alone in front of his portrait. Sarah had taken Chester for a walk, giving me space for what she knew I needed to do. I stood there, looking up at the painted version of the man who'd saved my life in more ways than one, and I whispered, "We won, Grandpa. They tried their best, but your plan worked perfectly. You taught me to keep receipts, and boy, did I keep them." I could almost hear his laugh, that dry chuckle he'd do when something amused him. "I'm doing good," I continued quietly. "The firm's helping people. I married someone who actually shows up, and I'm trying to be half the man you were. I think you'd be proud. At least, I hope you would be." The portrait didn't answer, obviously, but I didn't need it to. I knew. I walked out of the Henry Whitmore Justice Center into the afternoon sunshine, where Sarah was waiting with Chester pulling on his leash, trying to chase a pigeon. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that said she understood everything without me having to explain, and we headed home together. Behind me, carved in stone above the courthouse entrance, Grandpa's name would remind everyone who entered that justice, real justice, isn't just about laws and verdicts. It's about truth. It's about showing up. It's about choosing every single day to be a person of integrity, even when, especially when, it would be easier not to. Love shows up. Greed shows out. And sometimes, karma wears a robe and a gavel. Grandpa would have loved that line.